This derelict is his empire. Sacrificed to pride. Paid for in blood.
And when the end comes, I'll reserve the right to be last.
Welcome back to Eventide Radio, a fan-made Destiny podcast. Thank you for joining myself and my co-hosts Rob and Robbie today for a very special episode, our deep dive into the latest dungeon, Duality. Allow me to set the stage. The long-missing, now derelict vessel, the fabled Leviathan, has reappeared in the Sol system, firmly planted within the orbit of our moon. Acting as a conduit between the pyramid, the Nightmares have extended their domain to the infested ship. Burning questions about Callus's abilities and intentions remain. The legendary hunter Eris Morn discovers a way to bridge a link into Callus's consciousness, and our job is to get in there and find whatever Callus is hiding within the deep recesses of his mind. Moments upon entering, however, we find this dimension is not what we expected. Callus's mind is at war with itself. Today on Eventide Radio, we're breaking down everything. Join us as we tackle this dungeon encounter to encounter, discussing our thoughts on the mechanics, visuals, and weapons, as well as the lore, the latter of which I've enlisted the help of Ellimist from the one and only Guardians of Lore podcast. Special thanks to Gabriel Flazino over on Twitter for graciously allowing us to use his incredible artwork for the cover of this episode. You can find his Twitter in the description of this episode.
All right, well, I'm gonna just take a step back and say I like your intro.
Thank you.
You've shocked me 2 or 3 times in a row now with your over the top whatever exposition you want to call it. I like it. I dig it. It's fun. So the first time that I did this dungeon, 2 of us did it blind, and the first guy had already run it like 3 or 4 times, and in hindsight, we probably should have had this guy on the podcast to talk about this. Shoutouts to Nam, who's been like our dungeon keeper for the last like 2 or 3 weeks. He's just been running people through this. He's a machine. But he basically was our guide, and I think that's the best way to do it, where we'd kind of get stuck, and he's like, huh, what do you think that thing is over there? And we'd be like, oh, it looks like a weird like bell thing. And he's like, huh, do you think maybe you should do something to it? And so it's like he never just directly gave us any of the answers. But it was kind of this fun, like he led us on just enough that it was kind of interesting and it was kind of a fun experience. Whereas I think every other dungeon I've done, it's just been a straight like, go here, do this, here's the mechanic. Like he never just did that. He forced us to kind of work through it, and let us get hung up a couple of times, which I appreciate. Like so, it kind of felt like a blind raid, so to speak. So it was. So first off, just before we get to that, I do want to say like the aesthetic, fantastic. I love the jumping between the 2 dimensions, if that's what you kind of want to, if that's how you want to interpret the aesthetic, where paths get revealed because you're going in one dimension versus the other. And it's like, oh, now this gate that was here is not in this version of it. And then I can jump over and shoot the bell again. And once you know it, now that gate, I'm on the other side of it and I can progress. So kind of a fantastic opening way to just introduce the mechanics to you whilst also doing kind of a basic little kind of jumping puzzle sequence, doing a little bit of action. I'm sure there's some of those hidden memory things along the way. I haven't found all of them yet. I've probably found about a third of them. But so the discovery that Galran, or the Nightmare of Galran, doesn't matter. Our buddy from Crown of Sorrow is back, and he's more evil than ever. Cool kind of reveal. Like, it didn't even occur to me the first time. I was like, I feel like I've seen this guy before. And then when it's like, oh yeah, it's the Nightmare of Galran. And yeah, I'm like, I recognize that name. First encounter, my thoughts are pretty cool. We'll dive into that, obviously. But I like that the first boss was sort of like a kind of a nightmarish revisiting of another one. And it wasn't just like those mechanics. It was a different take on those mechanics, which is also pretty cool. So, yeah, having played Crown of Sorrow, not a huge fan of Crown of Sorrow, but I did like the aesthetic and design of that guy as a boss. This big, chunky, dual sword with the cool helmet. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, I agree. This isn't so much a complaint as it is a little fun fact, but it's interesting that the original model of Galron was a lot bigger. This is
Right?
actually Galron's deception, I believe, is what they're using,
Yes,
both
which
for the
was
boss and the
right.
little dudes that you fight, the shades. So yeah, it was pretty cool to see Galron again. Robbie, as someone who probably didn't play Crown of Sorrow, what were your thoughts on this guy showing up? Did it have any impact to you whatsoever? Did you know of him before you got here?
No, I have no idea who he is. We
Yeah.
met for the first time. It didn't go very well. We ended up getting into a bit of a confrontation. But yeah, no, I had no idea who he was, so it didn't really, had the same impact for sure. I know that I'm the new guy who doesn't know the lore, but we're gonna find out also a lot about that for all the other people out there who are like me.
Absolutely. Rob, how long did it take you, since you said you did it blind, how long did it take you to figure out Galron's mechanics?
So there's kind of like, I guess this is spoilers, right? Spoiler warning, since we're going to dive into like mechanics and stuff. Because there's kind of like two parts of the activity. One is you have to figure out which door to stand in front of, and grab that, or you have to grab the symbol based on where the scions are hiding, and then that tells you what door you need to stand in front of. And then once you go inside the door, then you ring the bell, and then the shadows guys are there, and you destroy them, and then you do boss DPS. I think it was, having done the Leviathan and having somewhat of a familiarity with like the symbols, and the two other people that I ran it with, we were kind of familiar with like, okay, there's dog and cup and sun. Like it wasn't too difficult to kind of figure out that there was like, okay, there's each room or each corner has one of the symbols. Oh, you probably need to find a symbol based on doing a thing, and of course there's a scion with like a different health bar, who's surrounded by a bunch of dogs. So like that part of it was pretty quick to figure out. But then when we rang the bell, we weren't on the inside the first time, and then only one of us was, like, we didn't, like, only one of us grabbed one of the flags instead of two of us grabbing it, and that's when our guide was like, you think it'd probably be faster if we did two of them at the same time, right? And it was like, oh yeah, okay, like that kind of thing. But at no point did he tell us like, go here, do this thing. It was just more like, hey, he'd already done this a few times and had kind of learned from that mistake. Which, depending on your interpretation, maybe that is a little bit too much hand-holding, but I didn't think of it that way. It was just kind of like, we had some time to kind of like, but we wiped a couple times because we kind of kept screwing up the sequence of like standing in front of the door and killing the guy and going in there, and then teleporting on the other side. Again, using that duality mechanic of swapping between the two dimensions. I keep saying that, but there's probably the more technical lore version of saying that. But it was kind of, the pieces were pretty obvious, but then kind of fitting them all together was just frustrating enough that it took a little bit of time to figure out kind of the right order to execute things. And then when you get to damage, and then I think we wiped because we weren't paying attention to the countdown timer in the nightmare world, and then like died. And then like, I don't think it occurred to us why we died. And that's again another instance where he didn't tell us right away, but it's like, like we figured out like, oh right, if you ring the bell, it transports you back and it resets the time and all that stuff. So it was not super time intensive, but it was just long enough. And I think a good way, like we've talked about this in the past, like how do you introduce mechanics that sort of compound and build off of each other? Like how do you introduce them? Like we talked about that with like Vow of the Disciple, and a little bit with like Grasp of Avarice, things like that. And obviously I think Grasp of Avarice is probably the lowest common denominator in terms of like complexity of mechanics, where it's like, oh, all these things that fall on the ground and then you just dunk them somewhere, and not having really any complexity much beyond that. This at least kind of requires a little bit of coordination and knowing what corner to dunk said item in. So it's at least a little more complicated. But just frustrating enough that it kept my interest, and wanted me to kind of keep trying at it until figuring it out. So it wasn't super crazy long, but long enough that it was good.
Yeah, long enough that was interesting.
Exactly.
Because like I think it took us about the same, or so my friend Ryan and I, we two-manned this encounter blind, and it probably took us the same amount of time that it took us to complete the entire Grasp of Avarice raid or dungeon 2-man blind. It took us to beat this encounter.
Wow. Okay.
This encounter is much more complex and engaging and interesting than something like
Yes.
Grasp of Avarice or Prophecy or whatever. This dungeon goes on to kind of repeat, the bell mechanic and the flag dunking thing, but it's interesting enough that it doesn't feel as, stupidly repetitive as something like Grasp, where you're just picking up the thing and dunking it the entire time. It took us a longer amount of time to figure out how to do this one, and that's what I thought made it good and interesting. And it took us longer than I'm proud to admit to figure out that we're supposed to go inside the doors and stuff to get teleported in.
Right.
But yeah, it was interesting. I was
Right.
happy that this one was more complex and exciting, and it was also just like in terms of like combat, I thought it was also engaging. And that's a consistent throughout all the dungeons, but it was just overall really good, and I thought it looked cool, and et cetera, et cetera. Robbie, did you play this blind, or did you?
Yeah, I had a similar experience than Rob, actually. More than Rob than yours, because I was playing with a friend, and then we couldn't find like a third person that we knew. So we ended up like elevating a third one, but asked them first, like, or it was the first time, we're going to kind of take our time. If you're okay with that, we'll be fine. But we don't want to get rushed. We don't want you to like spoil everything for us. And so we found a guy who was pretty cool with that. Kind of the same idea. Like basically we would run like 2-3 times through the encounter and see if we could figure it out ourselves. And then if there was like a tip, it's like, okay, you can tell us something now.
Exactly.
But it was also a guy who basically had gone to the final boss but didn't beat the final boss, so he also like hadn't finished it. And he was cool about us exploring the map, which was actually why we took the longest, because we were trying to find all the shadows and all these collectible things, which at some point we just gave up.
Right.
Because it became a bit more hassle than fun when we would keep getting stuck out of the map everywhere just for trying to jump over things. But I mean, my first impression, besides that, like I had a good time, but it was like, so you're ripping off Zelda and many Zelda games, and I'm sure other platformers, because like this is full of platforming, by the way.
Yes.
I know in Destiny, everybody calls it jumping puzzles, even though it's not really a puzzle,
Right.
but whatever. So it's full of platforming, and it has like the same mechanic of like the Shadow Realm or things like that we've seen in other games. Like, and I mean, at least for me, like the first one I can trace it back, me playing it was like Zelda, right? And Zelda is the same thing. You got dungeons, you got these kind of mechanics, you gotta solve things, you gotta figure some things out. And I think maybe that's why I ended up with like a bad taste in my mouth after the dungeon, because I was like, well, yeah, but it wasn't as good as that.
Sure.
Because this was repetitive. Like, I get that you're trying to introduce the mechanic to maybe people who've never had something like this, or in the end, maybe just not in Destiny. And I'm glad that it's not modes, of course, like you were mentioning. It's not just like picking up the modes and dumping the modes. So that's good. I'm all for that. But then they made it like the whole thing feels like a tutorial. Like the first two battles really just feel like a tutorial to the last one. There's no evolution of it really. I mean, if there is, you can counter my argument and saying, well, there is, because they're introducing. Yeah, but it's like I don't feel like that had to be like a thing, right? Like it just feels like a lot, and I mean a lot of platforming in between like a tiny tutorial so that I can get to the final boss, which is basically just the same thing again, just with more snipers or something. So I just wish that the fights were different, Like I like the mechanic of the Shadow Realm thing because, again, like massive Zelda fan, probably my favorite game ever is like Ocarina of Time. So it gave me like flashbacks of like some Zelda games, and I was like, oh, I like this is cool. But then I think my experience got a bit frustrating because of the, like, I'm gonna call it out, like there were columns that were supporting nothing or half off, like whatever they were supporting. There's so many holes in the maps, in hallways, where you can literally tell like, oh, they built until this part and then someone else came and built this other part, and they like just put it together, and then you can go out the map and be like, oh yeah, you can tell. I don't know, I feel like the map felt really rushed, I feel like they had like a good idea and then they didn't execute it as best as they could have, to say that it is not a bad dungeon, but for me, it's also not gonna make it to my top 3 or whatever. So yeah, it's fun. It's something different. I like it. Again, I don't get a lot of the lore because it was fun learning about it and talking to people as we were playing, and like the story about these guys and stuff. Just I feel like the mechanic, yeah, like you said, you get a bit more complexity, but then once you get past that, you get a damage phase that is literally just a sponge because like the guy is huge and he doesn't really move a lot. Except the last one that is for some reason at some points like sprints like mad. But it's just like you can just literally hit him halfway across the map with like a linear fusion, and he's chunky, so you'll hit him even if you're not aiming. So that also didn't feel like very satisfactory, I guess.
Okay.
So I don't know. I had like a lot of mixed feelings about it. Like it did get me pumped, but then I end up getting out of it with like a bit of sour taste of like, oh man, it was so promising, and then I just felt like it didn't really deliver at the end.
No, that's valid. I think you're right. It doesn't really. I understand your criticism where it doesn't really evolve mechanically over the course of the dungeon. It starts off really strong with, I think this encounter is pretty interesting and exciting.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't really go anywhere from there. Which I think is the same problem that Grasp and Prophecy had, where it's just like, here's the same mechanic and then let's repeat it for the rest of the dungeon.
How I would describe it is like if you play any of those old Nintendo games, and when you actually beat the dungeon and you get to the boss, and the boss has like different stages. And like the actual map around you changes because the stage changed, and so now it's like a little bit different fight, but kind of the same. This is like that, but in between each stage you got a lot of platforming.
Jump around.
So it really feels like if they would have done this and it would have been just one boss, and each one of these one, instead of doing it 3 times each, it would have been 1 time the first, 1 time the second, 1 time the third. I would have said this fight is amazing, But it's not a fight; it's a whole dungeon. So,
it's a whole dungeon, sure.
Yeah,
I agree with you that I don't think it develops enough over the course of the thing, and it feels like what you said, where it's like a 3-phase version of the same thing. But I will say, I think it does. I think this dungeon does it better than Prophecy or Grasp. Rob, when you were playing this dungeon, did you experience these same like map holes that Robbie's talking about?
I didn't. Truthfully, though, I didn't explore it nearly as much. I do want to say, I think in the most recent hotfix, they fixed a bunch of that. I think there's a line in there that explicitly said they're fixing a bunch of like out of bounds weird geometry things in the Duality dungeon. So hopefully some of those things have been resolved. So to kind of go back with what you guys are saying, I think every dungeon has a theme that they just stick with the entire time. Some are more egregious than others. Like Grasp is probably, again, the most reduced. Which I'm thinking like if you were to sort of, how would you introduce dungeons to someone? I'd have them play Grasp first because it's probably the easiest in terms of like understanding the mechanics, and none of the encounters are particularly difficult. But they're still fun. I will also say the what's the one encounter in Pit where you have to just jump around the weird kind of maze area and kill the 3 hive wizards?
The witches.
The
that
witches.
One's tough if you can't jump.
That one's like it's.
That's the thing.
I've never made it I've made it a point to never memorize where to go, and I do have fun kind of blindly jumping around and like sort of like half being like, oh, I can jump to this ledge, but now I'm completely exposed and I'm going to get lit up by this wizard. So I there are parts of it that I enjoy, and I do agree with you that the mechanics sort of build up to each other, and then they all amount to the final part where it's like, oh, I did this part in this sequence, and then I did this part in this other encounter, and then they come together. It's like putting chocolate on your peanut butter, so to speak. But definitely Prophecy and definitely Grasp suffer from we're just going to do the same thing over and over again. And this duality definitely does the same thing where you have symbols, you go back and forth between the two dimensions, you do a thing in one dimension, and then it allows you to do something else in the other dimension so you can do damage. Like that's the TLDR version of it. And then you have the rogue one, which is the very first dungeon that we got, which I'm blanking on the name right now, the Dreaming City one. Shattered Throne. Which definitely, you still have you kill an enemy and collect an orb, and then you kill another enemy and collect another orb, and then you dunk it to do damage. Like, that's the theme to that. It feels like it's dispersed out in kind of a different way. I will say, though, the opening encounter that I still to this day hate, that you have to, like, randomly run between all the different areas. Like, that sequence could be about half that long.
Yep.
Because I have to have a map every time. I don't memorize where uwu fish is versus like eight snake is. Like I have no desire to like memorize that layout. And I always end up getting lost, but like not in a fun way, like in the Pit of Heresy part where it's fun to traverse that area. In the opening sequence, I guess this is just like a whole dungeon review. But yeah, I don't know. I enjoy the duality kind of the punchline mechanic, despite it being used over and over again, because at least it's like the enemies you engage with are different each like realm, and it's kind of fun because you're like, I don't want to deal with this guy anymore. Ring the bell, and they're like, let's get out of here. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think like the main core mechanic here of the bell, like you're saying, is at least interesting. I think it's cool and it's new and different,
and that's maybe part of it too, is because it's new.
Mm-hmm. Well, like nothing's wrong with that, Like I think that's a plus compared to dunking stuff,
right?
And I like that I just think overall, I mean, maybe duality repeats the same mechanic over and over again, but at least it's interesting. Like in the Galround thing, it's just there's a lot going on, because you've got the bell happening. There's different things you have to remember about the bell. You got the flags you have to deposit. There's like the shades you have to defeat. I mean, there's a lot happening. And like the opening encounter of duality versus, say, like the opening encounter of prophecy, I think it's more interesting than the others, regardless of if it repeats mechanics or not.
Yeah, and that's fair.
Mm-hmm. I heard you guys both briefly mention the aesthetic and visuals. Robbie, did you say you didn't like it? Is that what I was?
Yeah, no. I mean, I get that it looks cool or wants to look cool. I just feel like after the raid that we had, which was also very like and purposefully so, it looked like what it had to look like because we were going deep into the pyramid plays and all these things, and like yeah, it looked really nice. But I feel like this one grabbed a lot of aesthetic cues from that and used this whole like really shadowy plays. But there was no change, and that's the thing that, like you said about Pit of Heresy, like maybe the mechanics build up in a way, but they're not the same mechanic every time. It's like there are different mechanics that end up being one big fight, but every encounter is in a different arena. The arena is entirely different. It's big, it's small, it's a maze. It's not. It's these ones are not. These ones is just like a room with a couple doors, always with the same 4 signs, always.
Okay.
With the,
that's a valid.
That is a valid critique, yeah.
It's like they didn't put effort into building the arena itself. It was just like, we'll just use the same columns and the same symbols and the same, lighting and everything. It just looks so samey to me. Okay. I mean, I'm again, and I'm not saying I hate it, but I'm gonna have to take this side because I know you guys are like, drooling over it too much. So like, I would, and I'll say this to Europe because I already told Scotty this, but like, I'd rather do Grasp of Avarice than this.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So, Rob, to play the other side of the coin, why do you like the aesthetic?
So I like. I'm not. So I agree with everything that Robbie's saying, and I'm not trying to like discredit your opinion because you weren't there, man. But and we were kind of talking about this a little bit when we were talking about our season 17 review of you've never really played the Leviathan, and I don't have some like strong tie to it. I've only done the Leviathan maybe 6 or 8 times total, and that's including Eater of Worlds and what's the one that came out with Warmind? Spire. Like collectively, I've probably been in the Leviathan like 10 or 12 times to actually complete a raid. between all three of them. So I don't have some like great emotional tie. It's not my favorite raid or anything like that, but I do like the design that they took and this idea that we have this giant literal eater of worlds space giant ship thing that's just floating out there consuming planets. Um, it's a cool thing that they introduced in D2. That's one of the few things a part of D2 vanilla that I think did really well of like, yeah, maybe parts of it you didn't like, but it's like, but the raid is like has multiple raids in it. And it's like depending on what path you take and all these like kind of underbelly things. And like they really, I think the raid team knocked it out of the park with designing the Leviathan. And so the fact that we get to kind of go into a different part and you have this again this sensation of this giant open space when there's a few of those kind of sequences where like I think it's supposed to be like almost like rib structures where it's like you climb across where it really gives you a sense of how vast and gigantic this ship really is. And it's like, wow, we've never been here to this part of the Leviathan before. Like, how much more is there to discover? So I think that kind of like wonderment, if you will, was definitely there. I was also getting a little bit of, this is another thing, Robbie, that you didn't play, 0 Hour, which was the Outbreak Perfected timed mission. And like the sliding down the ramps and not trying to get killed by them, that was in the 0 Hour mission. And there was a couple other sequences where you kind of like jump up and down through pipes and jump on things. Like I was kind of getting vibes from that, so it was kind of fun to get a little bit of a, we'll say, throwback to that, if you will. And so it was fun going through that the first time. And this is where I kind of talked about the whole Eris Morn. Sorry, I had a hiccup. The whole Eris Morn dialogue at the beginning, where it's like, I'm not going to enjoy this the 17th time. And the same goes like with some of those jumping sequences where like, I'm not going to enjoy this the 17th time from now. And that's definitely going to be a bummer where I'm not looking forward to having to go through that. And I definitely anticipate at a certain point, because we'll talk about the loot eventually, is like there's going to be where it's like, hey, does someone have a second encounter checkpoint so I can farm X weapon? Or does someone just have the final boss checkpoint so I can farm X weapon? Kind of like Grasp. I like as much as I like Grasp, because it's, and I've talked about this, like I love the idea that this has been in the Cosmodrome this whole time, and we're kind of like diving down into the loot cave, and kind of exploring. And I do like the aesthetic of like the whole Cosmodrome area, and I know everyone's got opinions about that as well. But eventually, like running through that dungeon X number of times, I'm just looking for a checkpoint so I can farm Aes Lunas, and I've kind of like done that, although there's no point now with Ostringer, which we've already talked about. But all of that to say, it's like I think all of these dungeons sort of, I mean, for some people they'll run through them like 8,000 times. Again, like that guy Nam in my clan, who's been sort of the shepherd for many people. Shout outs to him. Like, I don't know how he hasn't gotten sick of it yet. It's only been out for 3 weeks, but he's done it like
instead of Sherpa. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, there's Sherpa, but you could say he's a shepherd. Like we're his flock. And so
okay.
yeah. But I mean, I think he's done it over a dozen times at this point, which I know there's probably people who've done it 50 times. Actually, I know for a fact some guy posted on Reddit complaining about the red border situation, which we can also talk about, that he had to do the final boss like over 100 times just to get the heavy machine gun, like to get 5 red borders of that. So I suspect they'll patch that at some point too, because the craftable weapons as part of this is also kind of annoying. But anyway, all that to say, every dungeon's going to get annoying. Vow of the Disciple is going to get annoying.
Oh yeah, I mean that's going to happen.
That's going to happen
eventually, sure.
Eventually, and I think it's just sort of important to not over fatigue yourself with any of these things.
Yeah, that's if that's like one thing that I would say for most people is like, and including me, like I've been learning how to do that too.
Yeah,
and honestly, the one thing I want to add about the aesthetics and all that stuff is like maybe I'm also a bit harsh on that side of it, because we've had such great missions lately, like the one for the DMT.
Yep.
You know, that wasn't a dungeon, but that was amazing. The whole ship was built great. Every part of it had like a sense, you know, like the Star Wars trash can thing and the jumping parts and this and that.
Right.
Then we had the new one that's also kind of like you said, going back into the old raid, and for me being there for like the first time, and seeing how it changed. And so like it's just like I underrate. I gotta contrast it with like so many things that we've had recently that are not even dungeons, but I feel like if you grabbed the mission from the D&T and made it a dungeon, I would have been super happy about that. For
Oh, yeah.
example, if it stayed.
Oh yeah, and I think you hit the hammer on the head. Like after playing Presage or Presage, it's hard to come back from any mission, because that felt so. I mean
Polished.
that felt so out of place for Destiny that it still kind of sends shivers down my spine. Like how well done that was. Like I never
Yeah.
thought I'd want to do missions like that solo, but I absolutely loved exploring every nook and cranny of that because of how well done it was. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a whole ship. It was
Yeah.
great. I loved it, and yeah, like you said, it just felt like such a polished product that they came out with,
Right.
right? And people were not expecting it. And we saw it with the Hawkmoon before. Like they had an idea of making something of this caliber,
Right.
when they tried with that one, and then we saw Presage, and it's like, okay, yeah, you guys nailed it.
Right.
That was great. So I feel like this one's like a bit of a step back for me in that sense,
That's
where
fair.
like that was a mission, and I expect him to be, at least as good. Just keep giving us that standard of greatness that you've been putting out. So for the dungeon, obviously, and especially if just to remind everybody that it's not a free one.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I don't know. I just expected more.
Sure.
I think there was sort of a. This is my interpretation. So it's like $10 if you bought it outside of the deluxe edition, essentially, because it's both of them are $20. So you
Yes.
can split it down the middle. They did add a seal to this, which they've never done for a dungeon before. So that's kind of cool. So if you are a title chaser, then the introduction of this is right up your alley. And I think it's worth sort of giving some credit to that's probably why the cost of it was $10. Because it is kind of, considering we had to pay for. I will say this feels like a better value than Grasp of Avarice. So
Yes, I would
uh,
agree.
uh,
But of course I do.
yeah, I know we've also had the discussion of like, well, with Grasp you're also paying for all the ornaments, which I don't consider those to have the same value as like gameplay.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I'm looking at it as $30 for Grasp versus $10 for this. I think this is definitely a much better value, and you get a seal title out of it. So, yeah.
So one thing I wanted to add, to go back to aesthetics. So I want to preface before I say this. I do like the aesthetic of this because I love the Leviathan and I think it's cool. And I think the Nightmare Realm is cool too. And I like the contrast between the two. I think it's neat. I like the aesthetic. I genuinely do. I think it's up there for me. I don't think it's as cool as Prophecies or something like that, but I think it's cool. But I will say, I don't think this dungeon really had any of those like wow moments. It didn't quite feel
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
original Leviathan. Like, say what you want about the Eater of Worlds raid, but one of my favorite moments from that one is that cannon that you jump in,
Oh
where you
yeah.
get shot out of that cannon into the mouth of the Leviathan. There's not a whole lot of moments in this dungeon that felt like that, and I think some of the other dungeons actually have moments like that, or similar ones. I mean, even though Grasp is my least favorite, I'll admit the moment where you get through the opening cave and then you look out over the Cosmodrome, and the original whatever track that was, I think it's called The Traveler, from the original Destiny soundtrack plays,
Right.
and you're just hit with like overwhelming nostalgia, and it's just super cool. There's not a moment like that, I don't think, in Duality, and I guess that might detract from it. But
yeah. That's true. That's true.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
unless you
because
guys,
I do also like how it looks. I just commenting on like how it never really changes. And I think you just like gave a great point because I feel like the other ones do have like that moment where you like after a jumping puzzle or like a tunnel or something, you end up in a bigger area. Like, oh wow, okay, yeah, and you're right. Like we didn't really get. I guess the only moment I felt that, if I want to be fair, is the first time you go into the Shadow Realm, right? And it changes, and you're like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
But that's just like literally just the first times.
yeah, and it's also, we've like seen the Shadow Realm before in Shadowkeep, so it kind of detracts because it's not like it's not necessarily a brand new thing,
Mhm.
Rob, do you think there's any like wow moment in Duality?
Not really.
Yeah.
the final boss reveal, maybe, which we'll get into.
We'll cover that shortly. But yes, you're right.
That's kind of cool, but
Mhm.
yeah, I wasn't, again, not totally blown away. I think if you were to ask me to narrow it down into like one sentences, it's a pretty good dungeon.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
nothing blown me away. I think it's got a good, healthy mix of mechanics that are at least kind of keep you interested. The jumping puzzles between each are kind of fun, despite them maybe getting old eventually. It's just it's pretty good. Not
Mhm.
I don't want to say it's like it's okay. It's more than mediocre. It's a solid dungeon. But
Yeah,
I
I'd
don't
agree.
know. Yeah,
It's not quite perfect, but it's not bad. I think it's
exactly.
pretty
It's a
decent.
passing mark.
It's a
I
passing
agree
mark.
with
Yeah,
that. I'll agree with that. Yeah.
exactly.
And I like it's not gonna be prophecy for me where I'm like I will do duality 5 times before I do another prophecy. I think
Sure.
like that's my like hatred to like ratio or something, if you want to call it that or something.
I get I get that.
Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to mention, and this might make no sense to you guys, but I'm going to say it anyways, that I just remembered that I was going to say about aesthetic. So one of my problems with Shattered Throne is the Ascendant Plane aesthetic, in the sense that I think I've probably mentioned this to you guys before, but the Ascendant Plane is very monochromatic, and it's cool for brief moments in time, but for the entirety of a dungeon, the aesthetic kind of wears on me.
Yeah.
And
Right.
in
Yeah, I can see.
Leviathan, it's got the contrast with the Nightmare Realm and the normal world, but and I totally understand narratively why they did this, because you're in Callus's consciousness, so it's not the actual Leviathan. But if you look at the actual Leviathan, it's much brighter and more saturated in color than the Callus's consciousness world.
Right.
And Callus's Leviathan in his mind looks a lot more washed out. And I totally get why they did that, narratively speaking, but it doesn't feel the same as the original Leviathan. So it
Right.
kind of
Like it could
detracts
have
from that
even had
original.
more contrast if they had it
Mhm.
like you're talking about, and then the shadow one, the
I
contrast would have
agree.
been even greater. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
fair.
So yeah, I guess that's a small complaint, and that's again like a personal taste
No,
thing.
yeah, I've even heard from some people who are colorblind that like the Shattered Throne, and I'm guessing this one is also gonna be like tiring, for
hmm
certain people.
Before we move on to the next little subtopic here, you guys like the first encounter overall? There's just the first encounter separated from the rest of the dungeon.
Right.
When you guys were playing this for the first time, did you enjoy Galron the Sorrow Bearer?
I enjoyed it more than the second encounter by
Yes,
far.
Yeah,
I
I'll
agree.
say the same thing. I'll say the same. And I also thought that it was in a way the one of the mechanics that might not even be a mechanic, right? But like, because I can see how someone can solo this, but also how like dividing, because like what we were doing at, and I guess that's how everybody's doing it, is like you get one person per seal, and then one person killing the the bell people,
Right.
and that just makes things go faster. And I don't think we had that kind of like division separation of like roles that were literally put in different locked rooms before as we had in this one. So that was like a nice change that I actually like that. But yeah,
Mhm.
I definitely will say that the same as Rob. I prefer this one, especially as a first time playing it, than I did the second one, realizing what it was.
All right, so now that we've dove into the first encounter, the Nightmare of Galron the Sorrow Bearer, let's bring in a very special guest to help us break down the story of Duality. Ellimist from the Guardians of Lore podcast. So, before we get started, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and your connection with Destiny, as well as introduce us to your podcast if our audience has not heard of it before.
Hey there, I am Ellimist, lore nerd and nerd all around. Got involved in Destiny back in Vanilla D1, but didn't really dive into the lore until year 2. And we started the podcast, or I started the podcast with a friend of mine, Hyven back when Forsaken came out. And essentially, Guardians of Lore is a weekly book club where we read the lore entry and then we talk about it.
That's awesome. That sounds like a cool format.
It's one that we just kind of fell
So do you guys kind of like, you take like a lore piece, like week to week or however often you do it, and then you guys talk about it?
Yeah. So a lot of times we will do lore books and divide it up over like 2 or 3 weeks, and we'll alternate readers so that, one person isn't doing all the reading and getting dry mouth. And we talk after every entry.
That's awesome.
Start pointing out, oh, this is what that meant, or this is something that, is kind of an Easter egg. We know this.
So you guys narrate the actual thing?
Yeah.
Cool. That's super cool.
Well,
thanks for coming on the show.
Sorry, do you have like a favorite passage from the Books of Sorrow?
Ooh.
I don't. I do have some favorite lore entries all around, but Books of Sorrow, like it's cuckoo bananas.
It is. There's a lot. Is there one lore piece that stands out to you off the top of your head? One of your favorites?
It's not like it doesn't even actually have a lore entry. It's flavor text on the annual skate.
Oh, what's that one again? Remind me.
So the flavor text on it is, when the lake used to freeze, people would dance on the ice wearing boots with tiny swords and fall in love.
Oh, that's so cute. I remember that one now too.
Like I'm a romantic at heart. Like I'm a goofball, but like there's a romantic in there.
I love when they do stuff like that, when they reference like the current like modern time period as if it's in the past, and they're
and they're describing things.
Yeah, and like Eris with pineapples or something, like they didn't know what pineapples were. So this first encounter of duality, let's talk about it. So immediately we're reintroduced to a character that we already know. We see the nightmare of Galron, the Sorrow Bearer from Crown of Sorrow. And so this obviously has some sort of, story implication. If you're familiar with the whole story about Savathun putting the crown on, or wanting to put the crown on Callus, I believe, and then Callus made Galron to put the crown on. Ellimist, you can explain this better than I can. What's the whole little story behind Galron himself?
So Galron was created by Callus because Callus he was gathering soldiers for his small elite army called the Shadows. Well, he wanted a shadow of the Hive, and I don't know about you, but Hive do not exactly cooperate with other beings. So rather than trying to convince a Hive to become one of the Shadows, he decided to make a creature that had Hive abilities. And the way he did that was he created Galron, and immediately, not even a couple days after he was born, put the Crown of Sorrow on top of his head, and it started driving him crazy. So then,
Gotcha.
We went in and took care of the mess.
Gotcha. And the crown was sent by Savathun to control Callus, right? Or that was her intention? If I'm not mistaken, I genuinely don't remember.
Callus had found it, and he was like, "Oh, it's Hive. It's going to give Hive abilities." It was a trick from Savathun because, well, yeah, it gives Hive abilities, but it also causes the wearer to go insane.
Gotcha. Does the Crown of Sorrow, does it just make them go insane, or does Savathun gain control over them?
I don't think she gained control over them.
Gotcha.
It is a relic of darkness, so she can see using it, but I don't think she could actually control beings because of it.
Okay, it's not like a mind control helmet. It's just like a dangerous thing to use. Gotcha. So my first kind of question one of my first questions that I had when dropping into the Galron encounter is there's these tubes, like when you like in the spawn area for this encounter, or like tubes or like chambers or something with what looks to be like Cabal people in there. What's up with those?
Those are actually tubes for cloning Cabal. Callus manufactures his own army.
Gotcha. Are they clones of Callus himself? Or are they clones of just like a random Cabal?
Well, like we don't really know actually what Callus looks like.
That's true.
We've got his depictions in statues and stuff, but we have no idea what he actually looks like.
What his like current state is, yeah.
Yeah. So they could be clones of him, but I'm willing to bet that it's just a general Cabal template.
Gotcha. And then that's what he mass produces his army based off of.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Another question I had when one of my first questions I had when got into this encounter is that throughout the season, most of these nightmares are all like reminiscent of like past traumas and stuff like that, and they have some sort of like reason for like haunting the person who deals with said nightmare. Why is Galron a nightmare of Callus?
So nightmares typically are caused by some kind of negative emotion. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a dead person or anything. I'm willing to bet that the reason Galron is a nightmare of Callus is because Callus feels shame. He feels ashamed that Savathun tricked him, that he, wasted resources, created this thing, and it immediately went crazy as soon as he tried to use the crown on it. So
kind of like shame of failure.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Shame that he got tricked, shame of failure. It just shame in general.
Okay, that makes sense. So like nightmares can be any sort of negative emotion, kind of like how like all the missions in like the Sever weekly mission, I guess those are all literally named after like different negative emotions, like Keidel's rage and stuff like that. So if you could theoretically, so this would be representative of shame. That makes sense.
And it was the same naming scheme for the nightmares that came with Shadowkeep.
Okay.
So like
as
Dominus Gaul was rage, Fikrul, the fanatic, was insanity. All that kind of like there were 7, I think.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Those are all the different nightmare hunts were called a different thing.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. That's funny. Is there a lore explanation for why Galron's game model in this encounter is different from what he looked like in Crown of Sorrow, where he's like all big and bulky, whereas this version of him in Duality is Galron's deception? Like he looks like that?
I've got 2 answers for that. One, and like we don't have an actual official reason. My headcanon lore reason is that it's when we see him, we're in the nightmare realm, so it's where Callus has had a mental depiction of Galron. And
okay,
so he doesn't think of it as a large being. He thinks of Galron as the size of the Galron's deception.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
Now the other explanation is just game reasons. Like it's probably more taxing on the system in order to have all the enemies come up, as well as a large Galron, and trying to figure out all, how that mechanic is going to work and everything, like, it's probably just easier this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they might have even like made the encounter before they even decided, what Galron was necessarily going to look like, and just mechanically speaking, they didn't want a big,
Right.
bullet sponge like in a raid where that's what Galron is essentially. It doesn't really do a whole lot besides, being a thing you shoot out, and Galron's deception does most of the action. So yeah, I mean, both of those make sense. Rob, did you have any questions about this particular encounter?
No, I think I like your headcanon explanation, and I think you've kind of summed it up. I do kind of. I know this was kind of part of the previous conversation we just had, but like what is what does it mean to be a nightmare? And I think my initial interpretation was that it had to be like a dead thing, but it doesn't necessarily, as we'll kind of dive into more. But yeah, that it's like generally like kind of ashamed of this creation that he's responsible for, and that it is a nightmare that like literally haunts him. So it's kind of cool. It's like it's like diving into the psyche, if you will, of Callus as we kind of go through this whole thing, and Galron is the first of many reflections of that. So.
Yeah,
Well,
it's a mind heist.
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's funny that you say, diving into his psyche, because that's exactly what we're doing.
Right.
Like, that is the whole point of the dungeon.
Right. We're figuring out what makes Callus tick. So.
Yep.
And quite literally, we're physically inside said consciousness.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's talk about the loot. So, at least in this first encounter, and then we'll get to the next ones later. So, the first encounter drops a reprised Epicurean from the Menagerie, and we have a new weapon, a stasis grenade launcher called Lingering Dread, and it also drops 3 of the armor pieces. So, Rob, did you get a chance to get your hands on either the Epicurean or Lingering Dread at all?
Yeah, so I mean, there's actually a lot to unpack here. So the Epicurean, as you mentioned, is from Season of Opulence, from the Menagerie. It's a 740 RPM, which I think actually it's, what is it now, 760 RPM fusion rifle, or 780. They changed.
Yeah, I can double check for you.
Yeah, but it's the middle of the road fusion rifle, fires 7 bolts. It's definitely a throwback model to, I don't remember off the top of my head, from D1. It's jewel encrusted, just kind of like Ostringer or Beloved. It's a cool fusion rifle. It's got some pretty decent perks. I happen to get one from either the first or the third encounter, because the Epicurean also drops in the third encounter. I got like a, what is it? Surplus swashbuckler roll, which is kind of fun. I like fusion rifles, as you are all very much aware of my addiction. So it's definitely fun. It's the same model as Plug One. Like, that's like the classic D1 fusion rifle model. So yeah,
nice.
Yeah,
it is a 780 RPM.
Yeah, 780
charge time.
Yeah, 780 charge time. You're right. So that's pretty cool. I have gotten a couple of Lingering Dreads. Not any of them are good rolls. I know the quote-unquote god roll is auto-loading chill clip. There's a guy in my clan, shoutouts to Rory, because he always likes shoutouts. He has like the god roll, and everyone is like super jealous in the clan of it. It's a cool aesthetic. I do want to make a comment, because this is actually the biggest gripe that I have with the dungeon, more than like
I think I know you're
anything else. The aesthetic of the armor, the aesthetic of the new weapons, and the aesthetic of the Season of Opulent weapons do not make any sense whatsoever. And in my honest opinion, the weapons that are new really seem like they match more the design of the Vow of the Disciple. Like, those should have been weapons in Vow, and the weapons that we got in Vow almost make more sense to be in Duality, or something, because they have this like very like rigid, harsh. I almost want to use the word demonic to kind of describe them.
Yeah.
Like, and they're like red and black, so they look like they're straight out of Vow of the Disciple. They're really cool looking. But then when you contrast that with the Season of Opulence weapons, like those the Epicurean and what's the fixed odds is the heavy machine gun, which we can talk about in one of the other encounters. Really, those should have been included in like the season pass part, because that like they go along with like Ostringer and Callus's mini tool and Beloved and all that. I know that would kind of make that loot pool much more soiled, so people are probably complaining already, trying to get red border Beloved so they can craft it. You know, say what you will about all that. It just feels really weird to get this like Season of Opulence weapon, or to get this like jagged, cool, awesome grenade launcher. And then the final part of the complaint is, and I'm not accusing them of using reused content because that's blatantly not true, but the armor is all Hake based or themed. You can actually see like the Hake like symbol on a bunch of the armor pieces. Now that's fine, but it doesn't make sense to put that in a dungeon where the theming is based around like Callus. Like it would have made way more sense. And this is where actually I think it would have been okay to reuse armor in the same way that they did for Garden of Salvation. That was like an earlier like season pass armor set, but they added like glowing fire parts to it, or like pixelated fire parts to it. Like, I really think it would have been cool if they took like Leviathan armor and made it all like kind of match the aesthetic of the weapons, where it's got like these jagged parts and it's all like red and silver and black. Like that would have made way more sense than to just release this Hake armor as the armor for Duality. And it's a little odd, and I'm not a fan of it. And the reason I brought up the reuse content is apparently someone on Reddit posted that this Hake armor was shown as like some like concept art from like a year ago or something like that never came out. And then so they obviously they've been holding on to it for a while, and they chose to release it now. And I know with Prophecy, they did something very similar with the Dido or Dado armor. And it's like, it doesn't really match the aesthetic of the dungeon. And so I'm not a huge fan of it. Like it feels so out of place when you have like three very conflicting aesthetics that can all drop from the same encounter. And I'm not a fan of that.
All right, Robbie. So for you, what are your thoughts on the loot, at least for the first encounter?
So, okay, if I remember correctly, the first encounter is the stasis grenade launcher and the void fusion rifle, right? Which I remember Rob mentioned that fusion rifle that looks like basically like the other stuff, and not the stuff from
Season of Opulence.
Yeah, exactly, like the Season of the Opulence. So, plug one, void. We already have one. Didn't we have that one that was like the ritual weapon one time? So, I mean, yeah, maybe it's a different one, but I don't know. At least for me, not being like a huge fusion PvP player or anything, like any fusion for PvE will do. Like I honestly, I don't know, not super interested. Seems with the grenade launcher, it's nice that it stasis. That I'm gonna say. And actually, when I saw those, I don't know the name because I always forget about it. But when we played D1, there was this one SMG that looked like a shark. And then I was told the loot from that raid looks like sharks. And this reminds me a lot of that.
Yes.
Which might actually be the actual raid that this is inspired from. I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah, so you're talking about Eidolon Ally or Necrochasm.
Necrochasm, yes.
Yeah. So
Crota's End.
First of all, it's not SMG because SMGs didn't exist, but it did fire like supposedly when they advertised it, it was like it fires at 1,000 rounds per minute. If you ever, I'm sure, Scotty, did you ever watch the advertisement promo for when the Dark Below first came out? And it was like a fake streamer who's like, "This is Dr. So-and-so, and I'm showing off my sweet new kicks." And it was like Radiant Dance Machines and Necrochasm. And he's like, it fires over 1,000 rounds per minute. It was just like a goofy promo thing that they were for Dark Below.
Yes, I do remember that.
Supposedly that's voiced by Pete Davidson. I don't know if that's true. I need to look that up.
What?
Anyway, that was a hell of a side tangent. So yes, so that was Necrochasm. That's from Crota's End. But the other weapons that you're talking about that have a similar aesthetic are from King's Fall, where they all kind of look like sharks. And that was that one night where I was streaming and I was using Zauli's Bane because it's like the worst hand cannon in the game. And I did it to settle a bet or something like that. But yes, I agree with you. They have that kind of like sharp pointed. I almost want to use the word demonic. Yes, that's the only way I can describe it. But like that aesthetic is so. Yeah, I also agree with you that
They look
it's
like
silly.
fish.
Yes, they do.
To me, that's what I think when I see them. Also, this red thing, it literally looks like a tuna fish, before you
I
eat
know.
it. So, but it's not a bad thing. I actually like how they
Right.
look. I
Right.
do like how they look.
Yeah,
I
and
like it too.
I also agree with you that it's kind of silly that we got a second Void fusion rifle that's craftable. And I think
Yeah,
that's just sort of an unfortunate circumstance of, well, Epicurean was Void when it came out in Season of Opulence, and we're just going to make it Void again, even though, like, I don't know why they couldn't change the damage type. But like, yeah, it is kind of odd where it's like, great, another Void craftable fusion rifle. It'd be nice to get something different. So,
which is a theme going on for me with these ones. Like, I mean, going on to the second one, there's the actual SMG, which
right.
is also void. Which
Yeah.
I know a few seasons ago, I should say, everybody was asking for a void SMG because there was like literally like no SMG that was void for a while that wasn't Sunset.
Now we can't stop getting
And
them.
yeah, and now we have so many of them, and then we'll talk about that one specifically later. But then we also get the exotic drop from the dungeon, which is again void.
Right.
So that was something that felt really weird for me. Like, I don't know why it wasn't like solar. There's literally only one solar weapon in the whole loot table, and it's the machine gun.
Right. I know. It's bizarre. I agree.
Do you guys like the new grenade launcher though? The Lingering Dread, the stasis one?
I've gotten a couple. I've not used one, but one of my clanmates, he has an auto-loading chill clip, which is apparently like
that's
the
the
god roll. And he seems quite pleased with it, as do everyone else that I've talked to who's used one. I'm not a big single barrel grenade launcher fan. Like they serve their purpose. I just like every time I try to be that guy in GMs, like I'm gonna use blinding nades or like whatever, I just do horrible at it. So I've just like I'll usually collect one or two of them, but then I never ever use them. But
Oh, okay.
with the chill clip, I'm kind of intrigued, and
I think yeah, I think it looks cool. I don't have one myself, but it looks very cool, and I like just any auto loading breech loaded grenade launcher. I really like, and I
right.
believe it does. Does it roll with blinding? I believe it
I think you
does.
can
Right?
get blinding on it. Yes.
Actually,
Yeah,
it
and
doesn't.
you can
It
get
doesn't.
purple.
You can get. Oh, never mind. Yeah, blinding is on there. Sorry, I take
Okay.
it back.
Get me worried for a minute.
Yeah, Robbie, did you get a chance to get your hands on any lingering
So
dreads?
yeah, I played with one, but honestly, like, okay, it wasn't like I guess looking at it, I would personally go for auto loading Vorpal, but at the same time, it's like I wouldn't use it because there's like one of the reasons, and we had the one before that had like slide shot Vorpal, and you can spam that thing.
Right.
It's really, really nice. And this one, auto loading is nice, but the thing about the other ones is that, if I'm gonna use something like that, especially, it has to be for shields, and we don't really have stasis shields in the game yet. So
Mm-hmm.
for match game, it's kind of pointless for me. So that's why it kind of gets left behind. Like
Sure.
I wouldn't really use it for anything because I already have other ones that I prefer over this one. So until the day comes that I need a stasis for match game, then maybe this one will make an appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So not to side tangent. Do you think that we're going to get stasis shields?
I think
Yes.
they have to eventually, right? If
Okay.
not, what's the whole point of this? So many stasis weapons, because some of the obviously like chill clip, right? They only roll with like stasis weapons, and
Right.
I feel like it's a thing that you either kind of like or don't like. I don't see that much use for my playstyle.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm assuming they'll have to come at some point, hopefully.
Okay.
I believe so too. Rob, what about you?
I am not looking forward to the day that they do come out because
So you think they're going to do it?
Oh yeah, I mean, since match game seems like it's here to stay, unfortunately, like it feels like it's only a matter of time. I hope though we never get into a situation where we get all four of them in the same GM. like that just seems like a headache and a balancing act that nobody wants to deal with. But yeah, I think it's coming.
So for this next encounter, before we get to the second encounter, there is a brief little jumping. I'm not going to call it a jumping puzzle. You just kind of run around. But what do you guys think of that interlude section? I guess because typically we have some gimmicky jumping puzzle, but this I wouldn't really call it that. It's kind of just like a brief interlude before you get to the second encounter
Like
of
a
the vault.
platforming section.
Yeah, like a platform section.
Isn't this the part with the statues where you have to rotate them?
Oh, yeah, I forgot that happened, but yeah, I suppose so. It's still not like as involved as something like for example, like the Pit of Heresy's like ogre hallway piece. I
Right.
feel like that's a full
Yeah.
encounter. This
Yeah,
is
it's
just
an
kind of like
encounter, but you
running
don't-
around.
It's an encounter, but you don't get any reward for it.
Yeah, but like it's still more involved than whatever you call
It is,
Yeah,
this.
agreed. Yeah, no doubt about that. You kill a couple of enemies and jump on some things, and then I would say it's a puzzle the first time you do it.
Yeah,
The statue thing, but then once you figure it out, it's like, okay, everyone just figures out which one they need to rotate 2 or 3 times and then call it good.
mhm.
So I think it's cool. It's fun. Like any of the dungeons, it's like how many times do you want to go through the platforming sequence before you get kind of like
Yeah,
tired of it?
absolutely.
But
Mhm.
it's fun. It's entertaining. It's enjoyable.
I'd say it's better than like Prophecies like Wasteland. I feel like Wasteland gets a
Yes.
little repetitive after a while, especially because they make you do it. I mean, you at least go there twice
Yeah.
within the dungeon, so I feel like this would be less, I don't know, repetitive over the
Talking
course of
about
multiple playthroughs.
There's that one and the one from the one in the Cosmodrome. Both have like Sparrow sections.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
I just realized, think like you mentioning that, I just realized this one doesn't have a Sparrow section at all.
that's true. That's true.
You know-
do
Sorry, go for
you? Sorry, no. I do you like that there's no Sparrow section?
I like the Sparrow sections usually.
Mm-hmm.
I hate Rainbow Road with a passion.
Okay, yeah, the Rainbow Road
Um,
is tough. But once you kind of like realize that I don't know. I guess I played it so many times that I don't fall that often anymore. But I
I don't
see, yeah,
either.
it's
But
frustrating.
it feels so long, and like it like with the this is where I'm gonna be a grasp of avarice apologist. Is at least that like if you fail it, you all die and restart, and it goes so quickly, and at
Yeah.
least the music's kind of fun and exciting, and it's like
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
and but you get through it, you jump up there to get the secret chest, and then you're like done. Rainbow Road has a secret chest, but it's annoying as heck to get to. And it's one of those that like kind of encourages like scummy gameplay, whereas like one person will get all the way through, and it's like, do you really want to wait the 45-second timer? Which, by the way, why do dungeons have 45-second timers? All of them
That's a
have.
question.
That's something I really like. All the dungeons I think need to get addressed for any of these like intermediate sequences. Why does it have a 45-second timer?
I'm
It doesn't
not
make
sure.
any sense. And it just makes it more tedious because there's times where it's like, let's just wipe it because that makes more sense rather than wait for the one person to come back and like,
Yeah.
like, it's in like, yeah.
Or sometimes not even wipe it. I remember a lot of times on the Rainbow Road specifically, where like one guy just kept, like we were waiting for him at the chest, because the other bad thing about the chest is that it's got a timer. So
Right.
if you open it, they got like, I don't know
Yep.
how long to actually get to it. If not, it disappears.
Right.
And someone that maybe was like newish to the game, and I mean I was newish at the time too, but they kept falling and falling and falling and falling.
Right.
And it's like, look, we're just gonna kick you out to orbit, and
Right.
then we're gonna get to the end, and then we're gonna invite you back because this is way
Yeah.
too long.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think overall this intermediary section, as far as intermediary sections go in terms of dungeons, I think it's pretty inoffensive, but I don't think it's quite as fun as like Grasp of Avarice's Sparrow section or something like that.
Right. Right.
I
You
think
know.
they just need like a way to somehow like bypass it by knowledge. Like a shortcut once you know how to do the shortcut kind of
Yeah.
thing.
I know
Because
what you mean,
and again, not to be a Rainbow Road apologist or anything, but but that was like when I was playing Destiny and knowing all these things for the first time, like the first time you see Rainbow Road was like, oh wow, this is really
Right.
cool. And then the hatred grows with
Right.
time, but that first date with it was a sweet date. um but it was really like a showpiece, for the whole thing. Like
yeah.
again, like the whole Mario 64 nostalgia came back, and I don't know, it was cool. And this one doesn't have any of that in those transitions.
But once you get past that, once you spin all the statues and whatnot, you come to Destiny's like 27th like vault encounter, where you have to open a vault.
Yep.
And so in this one, you repeat kind of that flag mechanic where you're running around, shoot the bell, and you go find flags. You put a bunch of flags in there, and you have to kill, I believe it's like 3, like whatever the high-ranking Cabal people are, 3
Yep.
Cabal bosses. You unlock the vault. Success. So, Rob, what did you think of the vault encounter?
It's it's underwhelming.
Mhm.
And I don't know why you need to do it 3 times. Like especially when you're doing the same thing 3 times in a row. Like I wish that maybe this is like a big ask. And maybe they did this on purpose. So it's like, oh, the middle segment should be a little kind of like calm before the storm, and not make it as like mechanic heavy. And I'm not saying everything needs to be super mechanic heavy or anything, but it's like you go. And I've just got it figured out. Like I just grab G-Horn, I shoot 1 rocket at the Colossus, clear out all the dudes, and then by the time I clear him out, that dude spawned. I kill him, and then I can grab the flag and run back and outrun the dogs. And it's just like I do that every single time. And each time because I'm almost always the runner, every time that I do it, it's like I don't change that formula, and there's nothing interesting. And I almost kind of wish that it was like the caretaker encounter in Vow of the Disciple, where
Mhm.
each time you're running, the room you go into gets progressively more like there's like pitfalls, and the jumps you have to make are a little more tedious, and you have to actually think about what you're doing. And so like I really wish that each sequence, like that area that you go up to, is like more and more like falling apart, and there's just like floating platforms you have to do, like you have to kind of like quickly jump to them. But it's like you just do the same thing 3 times in a row. And so it's a little boring to me. But what I actually dislike about it the most is it seems about 50% of the time the enemies that spawn kind of in the room that you have to clear out in order to get the dude to spawn so that you can kill him, so you can spawn the flag. They will do some crazy glitchy stuff sometimes where they will just appear at the bottom of the stairs like you've run past them, or they'll like I've died to more BS like shield bash against statues and deaths kind of in that area, that it's just like infuriating. And I think that's what makes me dislike the run more than anything, is that it's just like there's too many of those phalanxes in there. And I know that's like part of the difficulty of it, if you will, but it's more just like obnoxious. Like I hate getting physicsed in this game sometimes, and this like exacerbates that rage more than anything else. When a phalanx you didn't see just sort of spawns behind you and then smacks you against something that you don't think should kill you, but it does. That makes me want to throw my controller more than anything else in the game. I've never
Yeah.
thrown my controller, by the way. I just the urge and sensation to want to do it is there because of that like event.
I
And,
totally understand that. I sympathize.
and it happens
continue.
more times than it should.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, it does. Physics are weird. Robert, did you experience that same thing at all?
Yeah, I guess so. But to me, the part I didn't like the most was the random snipers once you're coming out.
Yes.
I feel like that's the same issue I have with the crossbows. It's like, I mean, you spawning 5 snipers that are gonna one shot me is not difficulty. It's just BS.
Yep.
which ends up making you kind of zigzag and run like sliding and run behind things and okay, whatever, fine. But again, that's not difficulty in my eyes.
Yeah,
And I also didn't like that you have to kill all the ads. Like I can get there and kill the big guy, and he doesn't drop the thing until all the little dogs are dead.
right.
It's like just let me have it, and then I can try to make my way out, right? And if I don't, I don't. But I don't know. I just felt like that was kind of like unnecessary waste of time.
Sure. I'm gonna play devil's advocate on the sniper thing really quick. I totally understand, especially the crossbows, of course. I would say I don't mind the snipers just personally. I think it makes me like think about like my setup and like my armor mods and stuff. Like if there's like enough snipers, I might have to evaluate like which like damage resistance mod I want to put on like my chest piece or whatever. Like, oh, do I want like 2 sniper resistance or do I want like solar resistance or whatever? And I think it like forces you to consider the whole chess game concept of like which pieces do you want to take down first when you enter a room, you know, depending on how much of a threat each enemy is.
I make a point for considering things, but we have the armor mod in the season that is 2 elements right now, right? Which is
Yes.
what everybody will probably be running. And if you actually want to be, you know, ideal setup would be have that one and then have the other piece be the opposite, because we had the same last season. So then you have resistance to all 3 elements.
Mhm.
And elemental resistance is always going to be better than sniper, because the issue that happens with the sniper resistance is that it's not protecting you from snipers, it's protecting you for damage after a certain range. But like as you're running towards the exit of the room, the sniper no longer becomes a sniper, so your sniper resistance is doing nothing for you because you're too close to him anyway, so he's gonna do full damage on you.
Oh, is that
Right?
actually how that
That's
works? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it works after 24.5 meters. So
Oh.
basically, the ideal setup is always going to be an elemental resistance and concussive dampener, because usually things are going to be close to you
Gotcha.
or
That's interesting.
exploding or grenades or things like that. Yeah. So sniper resistance sounds good in theory, but it actually, I mean, at least me in my theory crafting is not what I would use most of the times.
Interesting. I thought it applied to the enemy itself. Like I
No,
thought like
no,
raiders and
it's
like the
distance
sniper
based.
science. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Interesting. Rob, how do you feel about snipers?
Well, you know how I feel about one shots and GMs, and
Sure.
I tend to agree with you, Robbie, that it's just kind of like it's like a I don't know, that whole sequence of like running, wiping that room, getting the flag, getting chased by the dogs. Most of the time, I just jump over them because it's like why? It's like the
Yeah.
timing on it's weird because you can almost immediately nuke that guy to get the flag to appear. So they don't actually present any kind of challenge, but then you're grabbing it, which takes a few seconds. So usually almost one dog always like lunges at me. But then I just jump over them, and then while I'm like dodging and weaving, I'm getting sniped. And I've gotten killed once or twice by it. And it's like you don't want to stop to pick them off, but you kind of have to because otherwise you might just get killed on your route back. So I get annoyed by it. Like I definitely not a fan.
Sure. I get that. It's a repetitive encounter.
Yeah.
I like what you said about it changing from phase to phase.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing something 3 times, and when you have to do it 3 times, it's not like a boss where you like if you're good enough you can actually like one phase it.
Yeah.
When they force you to do it 3 times, it definitely should change from phase to phase to make it a little.
And that's I mean that I could be wrong, and you could probably come up with counterexamples, but that's typically it feels like that's what they do in these kind of like vault sequences where you have to do some kind of where it like iterates on it. Although the first encounter of Val the Disciple is the same thing, right? You just do the same thing 3 times.
3 times. Yeah.
With no real change to the like geometry or map or enemies or anything like that. It just seems like it'd be kind of like if the enemy had more health, but instead it's like, no, as soon as I get up the stairs, I just shoot a rocket launcher, take care of all the phalanxes, and then just fusion rifle the next guy to spawn, and then like I'm out of there. And it's like I just do the exact same thing every time. Now you could also make the counter argument of like, but you can because and we'll talk about this a little bit more with the loot. the Storm Chaser, which is the new type of fusion rifle archetype, is part of that, and people farm the hell out of this encounter because you can actually do it pretty quickly and painlessly. So maybe it's like, yeah, the encounter itself is not great, but I think most people kind of like that you can shut your brain off and just
Yeah.
run through it 3 times, get your Storm Chaser, go to orbit, reload,
But
like
that's not a like how to say it. That's not a symptom of it being good design. It's
I know,
actually just
I'm
a
being
symptom.
sarcastic.
Yeah, but it's because literally, and I'm gonna mention this already, and this is like where my whole dungeon thing ends for me, kind of like it's oh, so on the other one, the one previous dungeon we had, everybody was farming the last boss, right?
Right.
On this one, this linear fusion is the end all be all of all the weapons in here. Nothing else matters besides this one, like in
Right.
my eyes. Is the arc one. The only one we had before was the tarantula, which actually was being used a lot precisely because we didn't have any other arc linear fusion.
Right.
And then this one being craftable, and then having things like clan cartridge, rapid hit, and then you have on the other, you have firing line or vorpal, you know. So I mean, what else do you want? Like, this is my exotic. Like, this is what I want is 5 red border drops of this one.
Maybe you can't craft it.
Wait, what? Oh, sorry. I got super confused. Yeah. I mean, I didn't mean craft it. I was thinking about the other stuff. Sorry. I mean, farming it.
Oh,
Farming
yeah.
it is my, like, the end goal of this dungeon is basically farming
The Storm Chaser.
the Storm Chaser.
Fair enough. Okay. So the appeal is that it's like easy enough and like simple enough that it can just be farmed for a good weapon.
Yeah, and I should take a step back. I don't think that's why an encounter should be fun, because you can farm it for one particular godly weapon, which, by the way, I'm assuming it's going to get nerfed.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure it will.
Because it is, I mean, like any other, I mean, I've had some pretty good discussions with some folks in my clan, because they're convinced that they're not going to touch it because it's got such horrible like stats, but like that hasn't stopped them in the past. If you can 2-phase or 1-phase the caretaker because everyone's running that weapon, Storm Chaser, then there's obviously like a best in class, and it's not exotic. And so I'm assuming by the end of the season, like it's gonna have its time in the sun, and then by the end of the season,
But they
it's out of
never
there.
touched the threaded needle, and it was doing the same thing. If you had like an
Well,
actual
they eventually touched Vorpal, right, and that brought it down. But this sort of
and
like
that's why actually the PvE gut roll for this one is not Vorpal but firing line,
exactly,
which was actually fixed because it wasn't working. Remember?
right.
So I mean, what are they gonna do? Like break it again? I don't know. I don't know.
I think they're just gonna probably bring the damage down on it because it's a new archetype too, right? It's that weird like pulse rifle version.
Yes.
So I actually haven't gotten one yet. But I just, like I said, I just assume that it's eventually gonna get touched. Not too much,
I hope
but
not.
it's
I
gonna.
hope not because it's like again to me that's like the most interesting weapon of the whole loot table.
It's cool. Yeah, I think it will get nerfed. I mean, whether we like it or not. I feel like part of the reason Threaded Needle wasn't touched was because that was, I believe, that was the season of particle deconstruction, wasn't it?
Right.
That was the season of linear fusions.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the big power fantasy that I feel like they were like aiming for.
But still is. I mean, I feel like right now there's 2 ways you go. You either go with a linear fusion, or actually double linear fusion sometimes with Arbalist, or you go with like the Galahorn.
Right. But G-Horn's risky, and a lot of these encounters they're like right up in your face. So,
exactly. Yeah.
I mean, but that's also kind of an interesting. You bring up a good point. Not to tie a side tangent, but this has had a pretty healthy blend of like what's meta is, because I've done these encounters with swords, rocket launchers, and linear fusion rifles, and all have sort of been equally viable. I mean, rocket launchers, you definitely run the risk of like point blank rocketing yourself, but you can still do it with each of the encounters. You can stand far enough back and still do well. So that, I mean, there is something you want, if you want to say it's like a testament to the design of these encounters, is that you're not restricted into using just one thing. And
Yeah,
that you
no,
can,
definitely not.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I
That's
can
true.
see that.
As a testament to the sandbox too,
yeah,
in the current state that it's in.
yeah. I mean,
And
like, and
actually, swords
sorry.
with chain reaction on this thing, they're they're amazing. I love it.
Chain reaction on what?
On a sword for this dungeon.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
there's
Interesting.
so many garbage ads that you can just slice
yeah,
through. Makes
That's
sense.
cool.
Yeah, I like that. I like
Interesting.
chain reaction. I have fun with it in rocket launchers and grenade launchers.
So let's talk about while we're on the topic of loot. There's also another weapon that can drop from this encounter. It's the Void Submachine Gun, Unforgiven. Did either of you guys get a chance to get one of these?
Nope.
no, me neither.
No?
I have probably gotten. I'm not trying to like pity myself. Probably 85% of my drops have been armor.
Wow.
Every run I've done, I've gotten 2 Epicureans, 2 fixed odds, neither of which were red borders, so that sucks. I got a handful of the lingering dreads, and then everything else has been armor. So I haven't gotten any of the new weapons except for the grenade launcher, and a ton of armor.
Dang.
Yeah.
That-
Which is another thing I wanted to kind of talk about in like final thoughts, because the loot pool is like weird and people are arguing that it's like weighted weird, way too much towards armor.
Well, yeah. I think
And I agree with that.
let's talk about it now. Well, we've got the loot table pulled up. I'm looking
The
at it.
armor.
Yeah, so, the first 2 encounters, 3 out of the 5 pieces of loot they could get, for example, for the Sorrow Bearer one, you can get a
Right.
helmet, you could get arms, you could get legs, or you could get the Epicurean or Lingering Dread. And so 3 out of the 5 of those are armor pieces, which isn't great. It should be 1 or 2. The second encounter is the same way. 2 weapons, 3 armor pieces. And the third encounter is much better, I should say. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weapons you can get, not including the exotic. And then you can get any of the armor pieces, though.
Well, and it sucks because there's new purpose, which is the pulse rifle, and fixed odds, the heavy machine gun, you can only get from the third encounter. That seems like a problem to me. I know with Grasp of Avarice, you can only get Aes Luna in the boss, which, Aes Luna is kind of a sacred thing to a lot of people, so it kind of makes sense that it was a little more scarce. But it's like there's no reason, like the loot pool should be like swapped a little bit. Like you should only get 2 pieces of armor per first and second encounter, and then have all the weapons. Like there's not the coveted, and considering the exotic is also a drop from the third encounter, like it's a bad decision. Like why are arms in all 3 encounters?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That's a bit. Yeah.
I was cutting the grass the other day. I don't know why it came to me then, but it really feels like the Hake armor should have been part of Grasp of Avarice, because it kind of feels like industrial, like Cosmodrome-y, like it's all kind of blocky. And then the thorn-based armor would have matched the aesthetic of the weapons in this way more. Like
same with the weapons. I'm talking about the SMG that we left right now in conversation, but that SMG, looking at it, it's a Void SMG, right? Which Demolitionist, it's got Golden Tricorn, Adrenaline Junkie, so things that work really well with Void 3.0.
Right.
And yeah, we'll talk about the sword later, but I feel like this dungeon feels like it should have been released last season.
Right. Well, I will say I appreciate that they are continuing to release, like there's that new perk for, like, how Solar got Incandescent this season, and Void got whatever it's called, the one that if you like, I feel like I'm embarrassed for not even being able to recognize it right now, because I haven't really used it a whole lot. Repulsor Brace, defeating a Void debuff target grants an overshield. Like that's cool. That's a cool like Void 3.0 thing that supports that. And yeah, it would have been cool to get it last season. We also got so much stuff last season that I'm okay with getting it now. Like at least it doesn't feel like, okay, we're done with Void, we're just going to abandon it and move on to Solar. Like they're still releasing things that support Void, and I hope that they
Void
do that.
build.
Like, it'd be cool
Yeah.
next season if we got something that is a new solar type thing that's not like incandescent, but does something else that maybe grants radiance, or just something that kind of keeps building into the solar or the subclasses. Like, it'd be cool to get another kind of void type thing where maybe you debuff enemies if you get enough shots on them or something like that. Like, just do something that kind of keeps feeding the build crafting. But I agree with you. It would have made sense to get it more last season. But it just kind of is how everything works out. But yeah, I think the armor is so bizarre. The design they made, or the design choice they made.
Yes, it is. It's pretty ugly. On the topic, to rewind really quick, because I want to go back to the loot table thing, just to compare.
Yes, yeah.
To Prophecy's loot table is pretty good in terms of like distribution between weapons and armor. The first encounter,
The
you
sniper and the hand cannon.
you get sniper, hand cannon, or legs or class item. Then the second encounter, you get sidearm or auto rifle or arms. And then the last encounter, you get like I think one of the Moonfang armor set pieces.
Right.
And then the final chest, you get 2 weapons or 3 armor pieces. And I think that's a much better distribution of.
Yeah, it's completely
Stuff.
opposite, because that one, the one that you don't farm, is the second one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No one wants the sidearm. But yeah, the distribution is a little funky. And I will say, Rob, I liked what you said about the fact that I like that they're not abandoning Void 3.0.
Right.
I like that they're not just making like a season specific thing like they sometimes do, and
Right.
that this is going to be a continuous thing that gets crossed over through the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're gonna get. We're like, I understand that, like, development takes a lot of time. These ideas, they have to get fleshed out, and they probably have to play with them in the sandbox and go through some kind of like iterative process on all these things. And they're probably sitting on 15, 20, 50 ideas for each of these subclasses of like, what do we introduce, what makes more sense, what kind of aligns with the artifact mods, like, what do we make sure that we don't release too many things that end up breaking the game. Like, there's so many moving parts that I get
Yeah.
that, like, we don't get everything all the time. And it also kind of makes things interesting because it's like, oh, look, there's still a reason to play with the Void because there's this new Void perk that, like, I mean, by the sounds of it, it kind of sounds like it might be useful in GMs to give yourself an overshield by, like, weakening a target and then defeating it. Like, it seems there's a lot of value in there. I haven't played with it, but it seems like it'd be cool. And it's neat that they're giving Void more of like an identity with certain weapons, like, and same with they did with Solar and Incandescent. So I'm okay with it. Yeah.
And Stasis is getting the same treatment too, even.
Right. Yeah.
With stuff
Absolutely.
like Chill Clip and whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Now that we've talked about the second encounter, the Vault, let's bring back Ellimist, and we'll dive into the lore of this dungeon. So my big question that I thought of when playing this was, so there's 3 like Cabal bosses that you have to take down, and they all have specific names. Who are they? I mean, do these names mean anything, or are they just random Cabal that you fight? Because they're nightmares, so I was wondering if they had any particular significance.
They actually do mean something. So the enemy names, like the personal names, don't actually mean anything. It's the tag after the comma that means something. There's one who is tied to a character named Sheyotet. There's one that is tied to Molly Imoli, and then one tied to, I believe, Umunarath.
Mm-hmm. I believe so.
And those 3 are all people who were part of the Midnight Coup. The Midnight Coup was essentially the Cabal deciding to boot Callus out of power. They exiled him onto the Leviathan and said, "Leave now."
And then, yeah, he was locked on that ship and sent to the edge of the universe, right?
Yes.
Cool. And that whole story was all part of like the original Leviathan's lore.
Yep.
Gotcha. And the hand cannon is, of course, named after that. The famous hand cannon that everyone loves. Well, that's super cool. So who are Umanarath has some significance, right? What was her deal?
You probably recognize it from, I believe the lore book was Empress.
Yes.
And it was from Season of the Chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And in the lore book, it detailed how Torobottle fell. Torobottle, the homeworld of the Cabal, fell because Amunarath found a tome of hive magic, started reading it, and she summoned Xivu Arath.
So these three characters all being part of the Midnight Coup kind of ties into the whole shame of failure sort of theme that seems to be connected with Galron, correct?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And maybe also anger.
And anger, frustration, perhaps?
Maybe.
So anger, how so? What's your interpretation here?
Well, I mean, they formed a coup and overthrew him. Like, they exiled him from his home.
Yeah. So he's mad at them, quite simply. Just like,
yeah,
they did something bad to him, and he's angry at them. Okay, yeah, for sure. So throughout this encounter, Callus is every time we make progress in opening this vault, Callus is like yelling at us. He's like, "No, please don't open the vault." So what's the deal with him? Being so against us opening it. We've never really seen him show too much emotion, negative emotion like this, especially in a vulnerable position. So why is this vault so special to him?
I think it's because it holds his greatest shame.
Yes, that makes sense. And he doesn't want us as the Guardians to see it because I guess does he want us to see him as like a god, I guess, and maybe perhaps seeing his greatest shame, he would become less of a god in our eyes?
For one thing, I mean, yeah, that could play into it as well. But for another, he's trying to win favor with the witness.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are able to actually figure out, what his greatest shame is, he might be afraid that we try and use it against him.
Oh, I see. So he's afraid of us having information, like blackmail material against him, essentially.
Essentially.
Yeah. Something to use that the witness wouldn't like.
Exactly.
Or would paint Callus in a negative light in one way or another.
Especially since he's still, as far as I'm aware, he's still trying to win favor.
Yes, absolutely. Rob, there's not a whole lot to dive into with this encounter, but did you have anything that stood out to you that you wanted to discuss?
No, I think. Do we know what? So we talked about Umanarath or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna butcher these till there's no end in sight, of course. So she read a tablet, and that allowed for the hive to. Did that basically paint a target on the Cabal? Or were the hive always kind of targeting the Cabal and this was just the opportunity? Like, is there kind of like a long-term plan there, or was it sort of we'll call it a crime of opportunity, where it's like, hey, these are a warfaring faction that we should probably wipe out and take care of? This is, of course, from the perspective of the hive. Like, I guess, like, was there a specific motivation to take out the Cabal and attack Trebottle? Or was it just kind of like, it just so happens that Omen or Wrath summoned the hive and it was like, well, we're here, we might as well end them? Or was it like, did they know that because Callus was a part of the Cabal and he was doing some shady stuff with the darkness and like...
Well, so The Hive are just trying to end all existence for everything and
Okay,
become the
that's
final
fair.
shape.
That's fair.
But with that being said, Savathun is all about trickery, and
Right.
so if she's able to trick, anybody, it feeds her worm. And what better civilization to fight for the Hive God of War, Xivu Arath?
Sure.
Like, essentially, she was trying to also help her sister.
To like gain tribute or however that works.
Essentially, to feed their worm.
Okay, gotcha.
They have to stick to their nature in order to keep the worm satisfied.
Mm.
And so the more killing that they do, the more trickery that Savathun did, the better fed their worm was.
So why would Savathun try to help her sister in that? I guess it makes sense because they all love each other, but like I thought I read somewhere that like the sword logic or something meant that like loving each other meant like killing each other or something.
Yes. And that's according to the sword logic from Oryx's perspective.
Okay.
There might be different variations of it. We don't know.
Okay. Gotcha. So yeah, so I guess the sword logic is a blueprint, yeah, like a religious blueprint, but like different entities have different interpretations of said blueprint, I suppose. I don't know
Think
if
of
that
it
makes
like
sense.
think of it like a religious set of rules.
Hmm.
Essentially, the sword logic is a religious or fanatical version of survival of the fittest.
Gotcha.
They're trying to become that final shape. They want to be the fittest thing there so they can survive.
Hmm. So this encounter doesn't have a whole lot to dive into, so this might be a good time to ask some of my miscellaneous questions that don't really fit in an encounter per se. So I was wondering if those memory fragment things that you collect throughout the dungeon. So there's some physical object, and I was wondering if these physical objects, not the audio. Obviously, the audio means something because it's like a deep, and analysis of like Callus's mind or whatever, some deep Callus secret. But like the physical object that you collect, I was wondering if that had any significance.
Not that I know of, but it looks like a splinter of darkness. As far as the physical part of it, I don't think there is much significance.
Mm-hmm. That we know of yet, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, gotcha. That makes sense. We only have so much information available to us at any given time. And there's a lot of things in Destiny that just don't have answers sometimes.
Because video games.
Mm-hmm. And Destiny, just the way they like to tell their stories,
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll just throw stuff at you and be like, well, it doesn't really make sense yet. And you're like, okay. And then maybe like 3 years later, you'll get like an explanation for it. And you'll be like, oh, interesting. All right, so moving on to the next piece of Duality, there's another little, just briefly bring it up, there's another little intermediary section where we're kind of navigating the vault. So it's not, I'm not going to call it like a retread of the previous encounter, because it's not the same. You're doing different stuff, but it's the same idea in the sense that it's a very light, like platforming, running around, even lighter than the previous little intermediary section, I believe. And you're just kind of doing what you did in like the opening piece of the entire dungeon, where you're just hitting bells, going to the alternate dimension, hitting bells, etc., rinse and repeat. And you're just kind of exploring the whole, Leviathan in this realm. And it's not super in depth, but just briefly, what are you guys' thoughts on this? Either of you, in comparison to other dungeons where they do stuff.
I mean, it's more of the same, but the vastness of the Leviathan it's nice to explore a completely different area, and it still continues to sort of like do the jaw drop of like, this thing is massive. I mean, it eats planets, so it seems like it would be massive, but you really get that sense, like there's that part where you're jumping on what I assume to be like trusses or ribbing of part of like one of the main structures, and it's just this long, empty, vast like nothingness. And you feel like you're barely making any kind of impact on just sort of exploring this small little section. So they do a great job of, and this is something they've always done really, really well. I mean, even when you go look at like the Dreadnought, there's parts of that when you're doing like King's Fall, where you're just like, this place is massive, and they do a great job of kind of emphasizing that scale. So I do like that, where it's like it's that kind of reminding you of like, this place is huge, and maybe we haven't even seen everything that this place has to offer yet, which is exciting as a thought as well. So it's more of the same. I don't mind it, especially because at least some of the aesthetics, like while you're exploring, are somewhat different. So
It's something to look at. It's a little break period. Provides a sense of scale for the environment that you're.
That's what I missed. So like the sense of I don't know. Maybe again, just because we got the raid right, that has also these
right.
transitioning
Yeah.
spaces, but those kind of offered you like a view on like, oh, I was all the way over there before, and
Right.
or you see the worm, or you see the and this one is just like emptiness. And I get that you do get the feeling, but I feel like in contrast to that one, it really falls flat.
Oh, you're absolutely right on that. I'll give you that argument. It doesn't give you that Grasp of Avarice does a really good job, where you can like at the beginning you can actually see where you're going to end up, and it gives you that sense of vastness. And same with Vow of the Disciple, you get that gigantic sense of like, wow, this is we're going to be here a while.
True. I don't want to compare it. I'm trying not to compare the dungeons to
Yeah,
the
no, it's fair.
raids, because I feel like the raids are on a
Okay,
different
yeah.
level.
Yeah,
Well,
Like Vow's insane in terms of like cool stuff like
Yeah.
that,
yeah, it is.
and like
You're
Last
right.
Wish, and like I think all the raids are on like a different standard. So as far as like that goes, I feel like it's okay if it's underperforming compared to like the raids, I guess,
Yeah, no, it's fair.
if that's fair. But I do wish there was something in this dungeon that was like a fun little gimmicky thing, like the sparrow encounter, just something, because I feel like a lot of the other ones had those, and I thought they were really fun, and they're usually a nice, especially when you're doing these encounters that aren't solo encounters and you're doing them with like friends and stuff. It's always a nice little break. And
Yeah, it misses like that palate cleanser.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think palate cleanser is a great way to describe it. I don't know. It's not a big deal. Just something that you think about when you do like the same little platforming thing twice. Not the same, but when you do that twice, it's whatever. It's not
No,
a big deal.
you're not wrong. I definitely the palate cleanser is probably the best way to describe it, for sure.
I think so too. Yes, absolutely. So once you get through that, you get to probably one of the coolest little visual pieces of the whole dungeon. You stand in front of the kind of like the silhouette of the big Bell of Conquest, I believe it's called. And I think there's like a little voice line or something from Callus. It's very cool. And you step down, and it's revealed that the final boss and quote unquote Callus's greatest shame is Keitel. And you get to fight the Nightmare of Keitel. And which is super cool. Honestly, I was not expecting Keitel necessarily to be included, because they don't often bring main characters like that into the game sometimes, because especially with dungeons, they don't like making like new models and stuff, new enemy types, if you will. So that was super cool to see. But this is a big encounter. Robbie, what were your thoughts on the Keitel encounter?
Well, it I did fall back together to like, this is the same thing we did before, and so now we kind of know how to do it. I guess the only issues that I had on my first playthroughs was like learning that you have to stand near the bell. Like, so once you get teleported to the other side and actually manage to get to the DPS phase, is like you gotta prevent the boss to basically going back, and then so breaking the bells, and then actually doing DPS was the most different. I don't even know if I want to say different, but it was like the only change. I feel like the rest was kind of like very samey to what we were doing before. So it was cool, but it wasn't like that shocking. Like in terms of like it being a fight, it didn't change that much to me.
Just
And
like
the
mechanically
arena,
speaking.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Again, it
Still
just
kind of
feels
same.
like it didn't break that monotony or add to anything, like that was, yeah, I don't know, there was no revelation, I guess, in a way. It just felt like the same mechanics again, with a twist. And so that was a bit disappointing, because it looks cool, and I feel like the arena, out of all the arenas in the dungeon, was actually the best one.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy that space more than the other ones, for sure. I feel like the use of the columns, and like having to take cover behind things, and start learning the spawns and preparing for them, and being risky, and getting teleported while being there to kill the scion or not, depending on kind of what you're doing with your team. It was fun to learn the fight,
Mm-hmm.
but it was more about like learning spawns, and learning timing, than learning mechanics, because the mechanics again were basically the same.
Kind of a retread.
Yeah.
Fair enough. One thing I liked about this fight in terms of mechanics, I love that we get to fight Keitel herself, and she's not just like a big bullet sponge. Kind of the same way that Rolk is kind of an actual presence in terms of combat.
Mhm.
So she actually like shoots you, and she's got like it's not mechanic, but she like moves around and stuff. So you actually have to fight her. Like the stun mechanic is kind of cool. I agree, it's definitely a bit of a retread, and it suffers the same problem that Prophecy and Grasp have. Not as bad as Grasp, because I think it implements, or what's the word, evolves more from
But
encounter to encounter.
prophecy had something, though, because once you do the same thing again in prophecy, then you go to the DPS phase, and it's a different thing. It's
Yeah,
like
you mean like
jumping the
the
platforms and
yeah,
all
yeah,
that
yeah.
stuff. Like that was completely new. So yeah, you learn how to do the modes, and you learn how to do the dark and light from before. But then there's this new thing in the DPS phase, and this one didn't really have that, because it's the same thing with the belts as you were doing before.
Yeah,
But yeah, the boss is cool. I was surprised at how fast she is. So like, you know,
yeah, she
she
hauls,
can
man.
run, man. She can run.
I
It's
feel
crazy.
like okay, so you're saying because there's a slight addition in the sense that Keitel like has him like there's like the stun mechanic and stuff, and you think that's not enough of a invention compared to the last encounter?
Yeah, and I didn't feel like it was like that much of a stretch. Like it still
Sure.
felt really samey to me.
Okay, that's fair. Rob, what about you?
Um, I mean, I for the most part agree with you guys. I guess I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I'm not actually a. I. It's weird because the whole time you're taught to when you're in hell, you shoot the bell and that gets you out of there. And in here, you shoot the bell so you can stay in and stun her. And I'm
Yeah,
not a fan of that. It seems a little counterintuitive.
that's
Because
true.
it's definitely not like what you would try to do the first time. And so you kind of like lose out on a damage phase. It's not about, oh, standing by the bell. Like it seems like it'd be more like stand by the bell so you can stun her and then do damage on her, and then she like does something to the bell so you can't damage her anymore. So then you have to run to one of the other bells. You can start damaging her. Like that seems like that would make more sense and doesn't completely contradict the idea of shooting the bell keeps you in the room as opposed to shooting the bell gets you out of the room. Which I like, and there's probably other instances where they've kind of done that where they've like 180'd the fundamental mechanic, but I don't like it for the dungeon where it's like, oh, now we have to do something completely different.
Well, yeah,
Um,
because I mean, as I understood it, it's like she wants to get to the bell to get out of there. So you're stopping her from
right, but
going
then
back. But
But
then
why
by
don't
you,
you?
but like what you're saying is like the same thing. But by you shooting the bell, you're the one who should go out, but you
Right,
don't. So it
right,
doesn't make any sense. But so I
exactly.
understand the fact that you're stopping her from going back,
Right.
but the mechanic to do so doesn't make much sense. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It seems kind of like slightly contradictory. And like I said, there's probably other instances where they've done that before where you don't actually use the thing the same way multiple times, but it just like it stands out because it's like that's all you've done the entire dungeon is shoot the bell so you can transport between the two worlds, and then now you're doing it so that you can stay there longer. Um, Fundamentally, I like the whole like the arena's cool, like you said, the pillars, like there's a good design to everything. I like the giant bell. Uh, all of that stuff is pretty cool. Uh, it feels a little hectic and chaotic for no reason. Like that seems like that's kind of the intent of the difficulty, which isn't a bad thing. But it's just like like an unending onslaught. And like you said, Robbie, once you figure out the spawns, nothing's too difficult. But it's a little just like okay, like it's a fun, chaotic final fight. And if you're really, really efficient, this is one that like definitely rewards you for being more efficient and having a good team where you can just power through and like, okay, get us into the next room so we can grab 2 more flags. Okay, get us in there again so we can grab 2 more flags. Like it feels like you're rewarded for being efficient, and you can certainly one phaser, which is also kind of neat. And like it's just it's more of like a meta commentary on like the design of the actual DPS where it's like counterintuitive. But I don't know, maybe there's some like in lore explanation of like, oh, because you ring the big bell, that causes some kind of time fluctuation and blah blah blah, and here comes a nerd to explain it. Maybe that's the explanation. I don't know. But I just it's like I did not think of shooting the bells the first time. I thought we had to do something else to keep her in the room.
Yeah.
And that was a little like, especially because you do have to do a little bit of effort to get to the damage phase. And it's like if you screw it up and she yeets herself out of there, you're like, well, that was a complete waste, and that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing. Like the first times we didn't think of shooting the bell, and it's exactly what you said. Like we were not thinking about it because we were not being taught to
Right,
do so.
right,
So I mean, bad design or just
right.
an I don't know how to call it, but yeah.
It's an interesting question. I wish I could comment on like our blind experience, but we did it blind up until like this exact moment. I don't know how much time we spent on Keitel before we were like, Rob, we called you. We're like, hey,
Yeah,
Rob, can you come help us do this? And you just explained how the bell worked. But yeah, I'm sure it would have taken us a long time to figure out how that was supposed to work.
right.
I don't mind the mechanic itself though. After you learn it,
No, and it's cool because like if you all huddle together and you time it just right, you can absolutely nuke her. If you get her right, like nice and close to you, you can lay on swords and just go to town.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And very quickly one phaser, which is cool. Like again, high functioning team is rewarded for this encounter, and how
Hmm.
quickly you can get it done. It's just yeah, it's a little counterintuitive, I guess.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my first playthroughs of it. My first playthrough, I should say, the first one was once we actually realized that she was running towards the bell, then we destroyed the bell. And that's why I'm saying like she's so fast because then she like literally sprinted to the other side and took us back
Right,
anyway. And
right,
we're like, okay, so us all 3 of us shooting the same bell, I guess doesn't do it. So now we gotta separate and just destroy all the bells.
right,
So it went from like don't shoot the bells to like now we all shoot the bells. But then in between, and it as again it's not my favorite dungeon, but it was fun to figure out, and I think that's a thing that never changes in this game. It's always
sure,
fun to figure things out, and
yes,
the only bad thing that I will say about this is that the mechanic being so counterintuitive, it just leads to more like and I did this week just to see what was new out there, and I was looking through videos on YouTube about people talking about the dungeon and all these things, and there's so many guides, like duality for dummies, duality for new players, duality the easy way. Everyone can do duality. It's like
right,
every way possible just is the same thing, but and I feel that drops a lot of players from the actual enjoyment of figuring it out. So if I should say something about it, is like, for anybody listening out there, it's like, try to do it first and then watch the guide. Like, just give it a go,
I agree.
because it's fun to knock your head against the wall for a while sometimes. Because it trivializes the whole thing once someone tells you, if you've never done it before, but someone tells you, I feel like, there's it just becomes so easy, and you kind of robbed yourself from the experience of it.
Yeah.
I think doing it blind is definitely the way to go. I think there's so much fun to be had doing it blind. It's all about the puzzle part of it.
Especially since most, I don't want to say this for every encounter, but like, feels like lately most of the encounters have been pretty figure outable. I know that's not a word.
Yes.
But
Yes.
like
I
like
agree.
we haven't had a Spire of the Stars in a long time.
Yeah.
Or even a Riven. Like, I know, like, I admittedly have never done Riven before. I've watched video guides on how to do it, and I just like I've never
one
been able
wants
to
to do
find.
it.
Yeah, I've never been able to find a team who wants to do it, and I like at this point I'm kind of too afraid to ask.
Mhm.
But like I'm trying to think, like, Garden of Salvation. There's nothing crazy in there that can't be, I would say, intuitively figured out. Certainly the new Vogue wasn't too bad. What's the Deepstone Crypt wasn't crazy. Um, the Vow of the Disciple, nothing in there was like I would say pretty lately. Most of the mechanics have been pretty approachable, and that it's not some like convoluted sequence of things that you have to do. That, because I think that's the other thing that alienates a lot of people, is there's sort of this fear of like, well, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, so I need to watch a video guide. And I definitely had that mentality once or twice about certain like raid mechanics, and it's like, well, once you start doing it, it's not too bad.
Mhm.
And you could make a case for like maybe that sort of like ruins it for the hardcore players, because it's like there's no challenge or nothing difficult. But I mean, let's be honest, most raid mechanics, once you figure it out, it's all about just kind of mastering it after that anyway. So there's like very little challenge once you get it down. And then it's
Mhm.
like running through Vow of the Disciple just kind of feels like, okay, we're just going through the motions because
But
everyone knows
that's
how to fight Rolk.
no,
What?
I'd argue that that's the part that, like, people who actually like okay, so let's say you figure out the mechanics, especially when something's new, right? And
Right,
then someone like you or someone like me, or I don't want to call us hardcore players or anything, but like people who actually like look at their builds and do all these theory crafting and stuff, then that's the point where, like, okay, I know how it works, I know how to do it, but what if I use this instead of that? Why if I
yeah,
bring this gun instead of that? And that's kind of like the fun that we have going forward. And even then, a lot of people don't do that. They'll just watch like a guide and literally use the same things that they see people using, right?
right,
And so again, there's no fun. They're like, okay, so this is the fastest method that I saw on YouTube, and so I bring this gun and I bring this subclass, and that's it.
right,
But I think that for you and I, even just because, like, you gotta understand that some of these people who make really great guides out there, because there's really great players that make content for this game, obviously, but they have their play styles, and it might
right,
be completely different than yours, because there's people who run around like mad, and there's people who are very stationary
right,
and prefer to have like long range weapons. There's just people who are not comfortable with swords. There's people who kill themselves with grenade launchers every other shot.
right.
So so that's why I'm saying, like, it doesn't really end there once you like, okay, so this is the mechanic. I feel like there's still a lot of that progress that you make toward like your, and I'm not going to say ideal setup, because there's probably ideal setups for things depending on the season, but like the setup that you have more fun with, that makes it the easiest because you're having fun with it.
So you're saying the true end game is not necessarily figuring out the mechanic; it's more how do you master the encounter and get it done faster and do your cool build crafting and optimal. Like, you're
Yeah.
saying that's okay. I'm not disagreeing with you at all on that. I'm just trying to say, like, it's hard to, like, I don't want to speak for the general population because you're never going to be able to do that. But there's a lot of different players, and like some people are probably, I mean, there's some people who still have never done a single raid in this game, and that's unfortunate because, like, I think we all kind of generally agree that raids are probably like one of the best parts, if not the best part of this game and franchise.
Yeah.
And like it it's crazy to me to think of people haven't done a raid, but it's also like it's that sort of intimidation factor. And I would say something like Duality. I would say Grasp of Avarice is probably the best example of like approachable mechanics of like if you were to say what's the first dungeon that you should do, I'd probably say Grasp of Avarice. But this is probably a close second because it is a relatively simple like building off of mechanics. A lot of emphasis on just like can you survive in these rooms, and beat waves and waves of enemies. So it's kind of fun. It's not super like mechanic heavy, and I think they like for the most part, they've done a pretty good job recently of not making convoluted mechanics.
Yeah, I'd agree it's not convoluted, but dare I say, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, I like it. Dare I say this is the most mechanically involved of the dungeons, though? I'd say.
Yeah, Prophecy doesn't have much going on.
Grasp is the easiest, I'd
Grasp
say.
was easiest. Pit of Heresy is just a lot of like the three sword things.
Mm-hmm.
In Pieter Heresy, you need one person knowing what to do, and then two people following
Right.
them around.
Yeah.
And then Shattered Throne is like pick
Same
up an
thing.
orb and dunk it so you can do damage.
That was a little more involved, I guess, just because each of the encounters are different from each other.
Yeah, but even then, it's like trying to explain to someone how to do Duel and Karu is like, okay, there's going to be 3 giant knights, kill them all
Kill
at the
them
same time,
and then kill the
their orbs, and then damage her. Oh, we didn't kill her in one phase, which like I don't think anyone can't do nowadays. But it's like, oh, dunk it in the fire at the last second, like, and then rinse and repeat. Like that's
What?
that encounter.
It's faster to just wipe it than to kill the ads again.
Probably, I would say this might actually be one of the more mechanic heavy dungeons.
I would say involved, not mechanic heavy, because I feel like there's other encounters that have like arguably better mechanics than this. But I feel like the optimization on this one does need like it allows for 3 people in 3 separate locations. I think I mentioned this before, doing different things. Whether the other ones and like Pit of Heresy, like you know the Shadow Realm and stuff. Like if you know how to do it, you can literally be like just follow me and then just kill stuff, and then you're the one doing the thing. We're the one leading the group from here to doing this. Even in the boss encounters, you know, like, oh, the witch, we go kill the witch, I pick up the thing. I don't even have to tell you what to do. Just shoot stuff.
Right.
But on this one, you could do the same. It will take you, 3 times as long. But if people know what they're doing, then everybody goes to their little room and then they do their thing.
Everyone's got a role.
So in that sense, it is definitely more involved per player. Like you can have like an actual thing you like doing, because and my runs have been like, there's the one guy who loves staying outside and just killing the bell guys and just killing ads and stuff. And then there's the guys who don't want to do that and they just want to go inside and do the scions and the running around. And then they're more like maybe spec for like boss DPS.
Mm-hmm. It takes me like 5 seconds to explain like the opening encounter of Prophecy, but it would take me much longer to explain like the opening encounter of Duality. I feel like Galron has a lot more going on than Prophecy.
That's true. There's kind of more steps to get to damage. The fundamental mechanic of like jumping between the 2 rooms and grabbing a flag, not much there, but the actual sequence that you have to execute them is a little more involved. So you are correct in that.
Yeah. I mean, because like Prophecy, it's just like I remember. We did this with some people, or at least one person who hadn't done it before. You stand in the light, kill stuff, dunk them in the light spot, and then rinse and repeat, and then kill the guy. But with Galron, like there's a sequential order to everything, and there's a lot of little things that all add up. I don't know. I found this one more mechanically involved, and I liked that aspect of it.
Yes, I would still say though, fundamentally, when you're comparing it to a raid, which I know is not fair, but it's like it's still, you can explain it in one or 2 sentences without needing to go off on too many tangents. Whereas like certain raid mechanics, I feel like you're writing a paragraph or 2 just to explain like how to get to damage phase, let alone how you're actually going to damage them. Like
Well, I mean, part of the problem with when you're designing a dungeon as opposed to a raid is that, at least with their philosophy, dungeons have to be soloable.
Yeah, that's true.
Realistically speaking. Yep. So, it's got to be simple enough to a point where someone can realistically solo it, I guess.
Yep. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's a
So
good point. It's a really good point. One last thing I wanted to say is like a lot of people, for example, in the Shadow Realm, like to get to the first boss, going from like symbol to symbol and figuring out where to go next. Like a lot of people don't think about that as the boss fight, but that's literally the mechanics to get the boss to come out. It just feels a bit, long. So, but in reality, that's the whole encounter. Is just going from place to place. I would say that you're definitely right, but I feel like, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Like that one, and maybe the Pit of Heresy for me, those two specifically feel more like raid light mechanics, and these ones feel like dungeon mechanics.
Yeah, that's fair.
So now that we've talked about the final boss of the dungeon, Keitel, Callus's greatest shame, let's bring Ellimist back, and we're going to talk lore of this encounter. So there's a good amount to dive into here, because this was a bit of a surprise to see Keitel as the final boss of the dungeon. So one thing, this is kind of a odd question, but I noticed that Keitel is wearing these like little flag things, like flag or like feather things sticking out of like her like neck or something, like her armor. She's wearing them on the back of her, and we've never really seen that before as far as I can tell. So I was wondering if there was any significance to that, or maybe this is just like her battle armor. We've just never seen her in battle. I was wondering what the deal with those the feather things she was wearing was.
I'm not aware of any significance, but I think it is her battle armor.
Mm-hmm.
It's some kind of decoration on that.
That's what I was thinking, because we've never seen her in battle, and this until now, and it would make sense if she's got some ceremonial thing she wears into battle, perhaps for like, I don't know, symbolic reasons or like moral reasons or traditional reasons, perhaps.
Yeah.
Like she has to wear a certain thing in a battle because honor or whatever,
Right.
So that would make sense. So one of the big, I don't know, it might be the wrong word for it, but like set pieces of this fight is the big Bell of Conquest, I believe it's called. What's the significance of the Bell of Conquest here? I guess what is a Bell of Conquest in the first place?
So, essentially, Bells of Conquest are kind of like Cabal made trophies whenever they go into battle. We actually had a Bell of Conquest back in Season of the Chosen. It was our artifact. And on that, there's actually a snippet that I want to read that kind of describes what it was used for.
Go for it.
The Bell of Conquest was a less grisly chronicle of the victories of its owner. Unadorned bells were given to warriors at their first blood. Those who wished to challenge a warrior in combat would request their bell and ring it 7 times.
Huh. That's cool. So what's the significance then, I guess, in the sense of in Keitel's position here?
Honestly, we don't have any official word on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just what's your interpretation, I guess?
My headcanon is he views Keitel as his biggest victory. Like, just her being who she is was his biggest victory.
Mm-hmm. So kind of, I guess, referencing the title of the dungeon, Duality, in a sense that she's kind of his greatest shame, in the sense that I guess he kind of like failed her, I guess, by like turning against him, but also the fact that she did turn against him and like the way that she is as like such an accomplished, successful warrior also happens to be his greatest victory / pride, I suppose.
Exactly.
I like that interpretation. That's cool. That makes sense. Do you think that Keitel will potentially be the first Cabal light bearer? Kind of a little spinfoil hat theory, if you will. Do you think that Keitel could be the first Cabal light bearer? And how do you feel about it? Either way.
I'm all for it. Well, I have to back that up. I'm all for the Cabal being light bearers. I'm all for the Elixni being light bearers. Keitel specifically, it would be cool, but it would also mean that she has to die.
True.
And she would have her entire past wiped. And I'm all on board for Zavala and Keitel.
They are
Is that their
Zidal.
couple name?
Absolute power couple.
Zidal.
Zidal. Hashtag Zidal.
Zavidal.
Zavidal. There you go. That's better. Or Kavala. Ooh, that one's better.
Kavala. I like that one.
I think you're right in this. I agree with you. Where it's like I wouldn't want them to wipe out Keitel's past because I don't really want a retread of Crow's story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to see that same arc again. I like what they're doing with Keitel grappling with her past, in the present moment.
Exactly. She's grappling with her past in a lot of the same way that Crow is, but it's also very different because she actually made those choices. She, that was her.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Crow, it was a completely different person.
Exactly.
Same body, different persona.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Rob, do you have anything you wanted to interrogate Ellimist about here, or anything you wanted to bring up?
No. I think you kind of touched on the kind of the key questions. I'm trying to think, like, the biggest one that I had were the Bells of Conquest, and I think we kind of talked about like because it's like kind of an old tradition that the Cabal don't really have anymore, but maybe for the sake of again, we're trying to dive into the psyche of Callus here, and that he's got all these Bells of Conquest, and he's like holding on to them for the good old times, the good old days. And that's what's kind of floating through his head, because that was kind of the big question that I had initially, is like, what are these bells and why are there so many of them around the dungeon? And like, I think we kind of talked about that. So that was what was keeping me up at night. The feather things on Keitel, not so much, but I'm glad we talked about them anyway.
Sorry, that's just something I was curious about.
Well, it's so spoilers, I guess. We're recording this after the kind of quote unquote final seasonal mission, and Keitel does have the feathers there. And so I think it is just purely a battle thing. Like that's just her fancy armor that she puts on. We'll talk about the final mission another time. But
we will. I plan to. I have thoughts.
Well, I can't wait to hear your thoughts. No, but I think it's a neat dungeon. And I know kind of before we recorded the podcast, we were kind of talking about like each dungeon and kind of like what the flavor is and what the theme is. And this is kind of neat because I've never really cared much about the Cabal as like a major threat. I know it sounds bad. Like even during the Red War, it was kind of like felt like they just sort of won through like a shock offense and through like attrition initially, but then we fought back, and it felt like that was kind of the extent of their abilities. I think what makes the Hive and the Vex such compelling enemies is because they use like paracausal space magic to always sort of like, it always seems like there's another, oh, there's the granddaughter of Oryx, oh, there's the great granddaughter of Oryx, oh, they're always pissed and want revenge and all that stuff. So like you kind of have this like like, okay, it's interesting as an enemy because, like, I mean, they were literally a hive of like they're giant monster alien bugs that keep coming back, and you can't just squish one out without 10 taking their place. And same with the Vex, like they travel through time, so they're scary and intimidating. But like the Cabal, I've never viewed as a threat, but this dungeon at least kind of made me care about some of their plights and kind of some deep dive stuff. So I like that. Like, it's kind of interesting to kind of talk about all these things in the Bells of Conquest. So yeah, that's my final 2 cents about it.
I'm surprised. I'm not trying to shit on your opinion. I'm surprised that you thought the Vex are a more compelling villain than the Cabal. I always thought the Vex were the lamest ones personally, because
We'll go off on a little side tangent here. I like Star Trek TNG, and I always thought the Borg were kind of an interesting thing. And the Vex always kind of remind me of the Borg because they're like a hive mind, and like they like share like a consciousness across each other, and it feels like they're always trying to adapt to like whatever the new thing is, right? Like they even like the Vex built one of their own things to be like taken so it could understand the sword logic and all that stuff. Like that's just kind of a cool concept to me. And like the Vex, it when you're looking at like, okay, this game is supposed to last for 10 plus years, and how do you make villains that can keep coming back or have like a villain of the month? And it seems like with the Hive and the Vex, the way they've sort of designed them, that there's never going to be any shortage of them. But like with the Fallen or excuse me, the Elixni and the Cabal, like it feels like there's a limited number of them. And after like 8 years of fighting the Cabal, I'm like, how many more left are there of them? And I understand now, like, oh, well, now they're cloning Cabal because they're literally running out. And that's kind of an interesting, compelling aspect to them. And like the Fallen, like, yeah, we're not wiping out the Fallen so much anymore because like there's got to be a limited number of them left in the universe in order for it to be interesting and almost kind of feel scarce. And I think that's with like the Hive and the Vex, you can kind of get away with that because it's like they're a little more space magic-y in terms of their existence. So yeah, just but they found a way for me to be a little more interested with the Cabal in terms of enemies because they're like giant space turtles and it's like a little goofy when you really think about it, but it's cool.
Okay, sure. Ellimist, what's your take?
I like the Cabal as an enemy.
Okay.
But they are lower on the in the ranks for me. I always loved the Elixni and how they were structured. And the Hive. Talking about the Hive and how they are actually structured as an enemy race is very weird because each of the Hive God siblings structure their tributes and tithing very differently. And we still have yet to actually see how exactly Xivu has done hers, but for the most part, like it's interesting, and I love diving into the Hive, even though I feel very grimy afterward.
Yeah, that's fair.
Grimy?
Well, I mean, the entire race is a death cult.
Good point.
They worship death. Like,
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up because at the beginning I was always confused during the Warmind DLC why what's his I'm already blanking on his name. The Orc's brother. Or no, not Orcs. Cabal Crota's brother. Nokris. Like he's into like Hive necromancy and why that's like kind of frowned upon. Where I'm like, why would you care about, or why would that be a big deal? Like you guys you keep regenerating and like you just keep coming back. But it kind of goes against their religion. Like you said, they like worship death and like like it took me a really long time to sort of wrap my head around like the sword logic and a lot of that the aspects. And so I understand as time went on, like him cheating death is kind of like it really is blasphemous to them and their religion, and like that's kind of neat.
Mhm.
It's especially with Nokris, like it's not specifically about him cheating death because they have throne worlds that they essentially respawn in. But with Nokris, it's more about the fact that he's gifting rebirth to others. And
I see.
giving is completely against everything the Hive believe. The Hive believe that you have to take in order to actually deserve that power. And if it's gifted, you don't deserve it.
Okay, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. I was like you, Rob. I thought it was because he's cheating death. I thought that was why that was considered blasphemous. But that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. They have to earn that power. Survival of the fittest, like you called it earlier.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah, and see, but that's just it, right? Like there's a subtlety to kind of all of these things, but that makes all the difference, right? Like it's not just the throne world and cheating death, but yeah, it's like the means at which others can learn to do it and not sort of earning it in the traditional Hive sense. And that's again, it's more than a subtle nuance, but it is a nuance, but it makes all the difference in why that matters. And so like it's very, very interesting to this whole thing.
Well, Ellimist, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us your wonderful lore knowledge. We really appreciate it. Hopefully, our audience got a kick out of it as well. And please go check out their podcast, Guardians of Lore, available on I believe all the major platforms, right? Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., etc. Go check them out. And without further ado, I'll close out the show. All right, so for this last encounter, the loot table is pretty significant. Yes. So every single weapon that's available in the dungeon is available in this encounter. So the Void Submachine Gun, Unforgiven, the Storm Chaser Linear Fusion, Lingering Dread, Epicurean, Fixed Odds is added to this, as well as the new Pulse Rifle, New Purpose. And you've got the exotic sword, Heart Shadow. And you have every single armor piece available in this as well. So I'm not mistaken when I say you only get one thing from this.
No, it drops
chest,
two.
Right? Is it two? Okay.
You get two, just like Grasp.
Gotcha. So how do you guys feel about the final encounter having every single available loot piece in one thing?
It just makes it so watered down that like if you're actually going for something specific, it makes it a bit like pointless because you gotta go to the other ones. I guess the good thing about it, and I'm not even sure about this because like the machine gun is amazing with Feeding Frenzy and the thing that blows guys up with the solar thing. What's the name?
Incandescent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Feeding Frenzy and Incandescent and that thing is so much fun, so much fun. Mm-hmm. But again, to get one is so hard, right? Because you get everything in there, and like as most people have said, and Rob has said too here before, is that too much armor drops. I don't know if it's like weighted towards getting more armor drops than anything else, but just the fact that there's way too many things, it's a bit, But then again, the master version also. I guess that's the only good thing I should say about it. Like, if you want to get those armor pieces with the extra slot on them, then it kind of makes sense, because that was an issue with the other one, right? Like sometimes you would do the master version and just get like normal weapons out of it, and you were like, "But I want armor."
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, that might be a thing.
I think it's ironic that the dungeon that brings the menagerie weapons back is the one that has the worst experience of you trying to like target farm certain things.
Right, when ironically, yeah,
that was the
menagerie was the thing invented
farming.
to counter this exact problem that we have. So yeah, I find that kind of funny. I think you put it very well when you called it I think watered down is a perfect way to describe this. There's too much in one thing. But I will say, there is no weekly lockout on any of these encounters. So if you wanted to, you could just like farm the crap out of it.
Yeah.
Right, but
That's
if
a
you
good
didn't
thing.
get it that week, you can't, or it's not in your loot pool and you didn't get that week, I don't think you can, like I still have yet to get a Storm
Yes.
Chaser,
Oh,
so I can't, like, if I haven't gotten it, I can't farm the second encounter or the third encounter until I get it.
yeah. Okay. That's weird. That is weird. It's quite watered down. Well, did you guys get new purpose or the new fixed odds at all?
Nope.
By chance? No.
All I've gotten is Lingering Dread.
Lingering. That's all.
That's the only new
I'm
thing I've
so
gotten.
sorry.
Yeah, that's all
I
right.
apologize. I have I got a fixed odds, and I think incandescent on everything is fun, but incandescent on fixed odds is a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I did not get a
agreed.
chance to play with a new purpose though.
Got it.
Don't think anyone has new purpose yet, right? Robbie, did you get a chance?
No. I also have fixed odds with incandescent. I want the feeling frenzy one, which I don't have. But yeah, I'm loving it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I
You know what it reminds me of, and I don't know why, but the Seventh Seraph Saw back when I was using a lot of the mods for that to make
Season of the
the
Worthy, right?
well. I guess I had it like way after, but when you would use I now I even forgot the name of those mods to make the explosive balls.
Warmind cells.
Warmind cells, sorry, yes. See, it's been a while. It's been a hot minute. So using that one to make Warmind cells and then blowing things up, this one's giving me the same kind of like joy that one brought.
Yeah,
like just
Explosions are fun.
Yeah, explosions everywhere, killing ants, solar. Yeah, I like it.
It's like fire. Like everyone's. I feel like Firefly is one of like everybody's favorite perks in Destiny history, and this is just like Firefly on crack. It's a lot of fun.
I don't know if Firefly, because I feel like with Firefly you have to be precise. You know,
that's why I'm saying it's like turned up to 10.
This one feels like the closest thing to a flamethrower that we have in the game. That's how I will describe it.
Well said.
That's very true. So, to close this out, let's each give a closing statement on our thoughts on Duality. Rob, starts off.
Yeah, so just kind of going back to the loot pool discussion, I think Epicurean and fixed odds should not be in there, and that way it gives you. Then it's much more akin to Grasp of Avarice, where you have 4 new weapons. I mean, new to us. There's the sword, 1,000-yard stare, the Matador, and Ice Luna, and but because you have those 2 new weapons or 2 old weapons, it sort of muddles the loot pool. It also kind of just sucks that trying to get deep sight apparently is a huge pain in the ass, especially since fixed odds can only drop from the 3rd encounter, so you can't even target farm it somewhere else. And so your loot pool is just massive. So I really think it's cool that the menagerie weapons came back ultimately. I like Epicurean. I think I still have one of my old fixed odds that I never deleted from Season of Opulence because I really liked it. I think those should not be in the loot pool, partially because it's a weird aesthetic to have. Those should just be in the wild, and maybe you can make an argument that it makes it harder to get the Drang and Might of Mini Tool and Ostringer and Beloved, because now you've got twice or half more, 150% more stuff in the pool. So trying to get the deep sights for those would be a huge pain. Maybe that's also why they didn't bring back Imperial Decree. Whatever you want to say about that. But the dungeon is it's an exciting. It should have loot exclusive to that, and technically this is exclusive loot to that, but it's old loot that's weird, and I wish they didn't put those 2 in there because it feels odd to me. And it's so the loot pool just sucks for the 3rd encounter and for the other 2 encounters. I wish I had more weapons, but it's just it sucks not getting anything.
Absolutely, I get it. As a whole, the dungeon.
Right.
Give it a grade.
Ooh.
A, B, C, D.
That's not
E
a
for
D.
Duality.
It's not a C. It's like, okay, I give it like a. But see, maybe you shouldn't ask me because I like Grasp of Avarice. So like,
Hey, you're entitled to your opinion.
I know,
You're-
even though
you're
my
entitled.
opinions are probably wrong in this scenario.
No.
I probably
Opinions
give
can't
it.
be wrong.
I
You
would do
changed my
this.
mind. You
I'll
changed
do
my
this.
mind. I'm gonna say that.
I'll do this over Pit of Heresy. I'll do this over Prophecy. I'd probably give it like a B minus.
B minus. Yeah, that's
Like-
fair. That's fair. I think that's a perfectly reasonable
the-
grade to give it.
The aesthetics are cool. The weapon design's really cool. The armor's kind of a bust, and I don't see it having as much replay because the jumping puzzle / not jumping puzzle, the jumping mechanics get a little old after a while. And the
They're not
opening
very
conversation with Eris that you have to do every time is also kind of annoying. So yeah, B minus.
Okay, Robbie, what about you?
I'll do this over Prophecy any day. Yeah, for sure. I do like the Pit of Heresy, so I don't know.
Me too.
Honestly, that's the thing for me. I would rather do Pit of Heresy or Shattered Throne any day. I don't know why. I just like them. But then, that's just me. The one thing that I thought about, and this is kind of like my final thought on it, we have that whole area, and you mentioned the guns should be there and all that stuff. During the Pit of Heresy time, I guess, where you do that public event in the moon, I think you do it. No, wait. So there's something that you have to do. I don't remember if it's with the Lost Sectors or with that public event thing, but you get like this. I'll call it a cookie, and then when you go to the dungeon, you eat the cookie, and then it guarantees you a weapon drop,
Oh right.
1 a week.
Oh, the Hymn of Desecration.
Exactly.
It's from the public
Hymn
event.
of
How do you remember
Desecration.
that?
The
Because
Hymn of
it's been my
Desecration. Thank you,
inventory
Scotty. I
for
have
so
terrible
long, and I
memory, man.
never touch it.
That's fair.
Well, the cool thing about that is that you could also save them, right? So you could, I don't know, give us something like that for this one, and I assure you, people will stop complaining so much.
Hmm.
I would love to see something like that because I didn't expect to have like an open area this season, but we have it. So the possibilities there, the options definitely there, and with this loot table, I would definitely want a little Hymn of Desecration over here too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I totally forgot about that thing. That would make perfect sense in this dungeon.
And it's
But, like,
only one, so you can it depends on where you use it, right? Like it will, like if you use it before certain boss. So if you're actually target, like for example, with the last boss being so diluted, you can eat your cookie and then be like, so now I have only 2 weapons that I can get, and just
Right.
at least once avoid having armor for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That will help a lot.
Actually,
something.
you know what? I got it for. I'm going to expand upon that. Is when you open the opulent chest in the public space,
Yep.
you can either get one of your opulent weapons, or you get one of these cookies, or maybe in addition to, like, it's a super rare and like not super common. Maybe as common as you get a red border. And when you eat one of those cookies, if you do it in the first encounter, you get a red border Epicurean. But if you do it in the final encounter, you get a red border fixed odds. Because then you're getting him.
Then it connects them.
Right.
Yeah,
Then you're
yeah,
getting the red borders as frequently as you are getting the beloved or the Austringer red borders. And you can specifically target. And once you get those 5, then you can then you don't really need those cookies anymore.
Yes.
But you still have, maybe it also gives you the opportunity where it'll have like 2 rolls or 2. I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter. Once you get all 10 of them, you don't need any more cookies. But then you can just consume them and whatever.
Well, but for the ones that are not craftable, you could still use them to target farm the rolls that you want once
That's
a
fair.
week at least.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. You got to do some kind of bad luck protection. I hate to say it.
Something
But,
you get from the Leviathan patrol space, which would make perfect sense, adds into the whole
Right.
loop of the season. Something you get from the Leviathan that you then take in the dungeon to thin the loot pool to get
Right.
what you want. Yeah, that makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. So my final grade, I think I'd give it slightly higher than what Rob gave it. I'd give it a B.
Okay.
No, I take it back. I give it a B minus because it doesn't have any fun little gimmicky encounters.
All
If
right.
it had a fun little gimmicky encounter, I'd give it maybe a higher grade. But I
If it had
liked,
like a sparrow encounter or something.
yeah,
So you guys both gave it a B minus now?
yeah, B minus because I I don't know. After Grasp of Ares, I feel like anything could have like been good for me, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's so nice. We have a good dungeon again." But I like that it's like mechanically involved. At least in my opinion, I think it's pretty involved compared to the other ones. I like the aesthetic as usual. I mean, that's a consistent throughout all the dungeons. They all look pretty, um, but it's good. It's fun. It's involved. The loot pool is problematic, but at least the weapons are cool. The armor set isn't great, but overall, it's I would do this over Prophecy and Grasp 100%. So
Okay.
So
That's what I
I was thinking of doing B-2, but since you did it, I'll be the one to bring it down with a C+.
Oh, C plus, dang. No, that's fair.
fair.
Honestly,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not even going to argue with that. It's perfectly reasonable. All right, so thank you guys for hopping on and chatting with me about
Always.
Duality, and thank you out there for hopping on and listening to us. We really appreciate it. If you guys want to send us any messages, we're on various socials. We're on Instagram, Twitter at Eventide Radio. You can also send us an email at eventideradio@gmail.com. Without further ado, see you guys next time.
Bye.
Ciao.